Welcome to the King's Report for March 24th, 2018, ninth year of Cheongi, the second month and the 8th day of that month by the heavenly calendar. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongi-guk, Hyung, and let's get started with the weather for this morning. We're expecting a high of 44 degrees today, which is still below the average. The average for this time of year is a daytime high of 50 degrees. But it's going to be a fairly nice day, mostly sunny today. But we may have we may get a snow shower late tonight in the Cheongi area, but no significant accumulation is expected. And then next week, we're expected to warm up around Thursday into the 50s, which is actually will be the more or less the normal temperature for this time of year. It's been rather cool compared to the average for the last couple of weeks or so. A lot happening today. A lot happened yesterday, and we'll get into all that. And then also today, I want to spend some time, as I mentioned, I think on Wednesday, going into the congressional candidates for the 8th District of Pennsylvania. That's now the new congressional district that includes the Cheongi and also the sanctuary church locations, and where where the king is residing, and it's a very important important area providentially as well. It is the center now of the world providence, and so we want to see who's running and what we need to do to make sure that the king is supported by politicians who understand more or less to some degree the direction which God wants to go in this area and also in the world. So we'll be getting into all of that. But first of all, let's go through the headlines. And then also we'll be doing a Rima at around 6 o'clock this morning, about an hour from now. The headline this morning is that President Trump signed the Omnibus spending bill, which the king yesterday strongly warned him not to sign, warned him not to sign. And it contains a lot of bad stuff, $1.3 trillion. Of course, about 700 billion of that, a little more than half of that, is going to the military, including a 2.4% pay raise for service members that is retroactive to January, and also a lot of new equipment, including a new aircraft carrier, is also included in that. But it also has a huge amount of stuff that for the Democrats that is truly heartbreaking. And well, for example, it contains the fixed NICS, and it contains a school safety program that says that no funds can be used to arm the teachers or staff. And it contains a whole bunch of stuff that the king has advised against. So that is not a good thing. And the king advised President Trump to veto the bill, and the president did consider that. And at one time, he is said to have seriously considered vetoing it, especially over the immigration, over the lack of a deal for DACA, with the delayed action for childhood arrivals, sometimes called the Dreamers. There's no provision for that. And also there's very little money for the wall along the U.S.-Mexican border and for other things like that. But in the end, though, the president did sign it. Although he says never again. I'm not sure what that means, but I guess we'll find out what that means the next time this kind of situation occurs. Of course, if it's going to be never again, why, never to begin with? I think would have been the better slogan for him. But anyway, a judge says that Trump signs the monster spending bill, budget blows into oblivion. This is going to increase the national debt by a lot, already at $21 trillion. And Anyway, he vows never again. Congress gives itself a bonus. Planned Parenthood gets $500 million. Lawmakers had 1,000 minutes to read 2,232 pages. Flashback, Ryan and McConnell lie about funding the border wall. And Pelosi and Schumer declare victory. Yes. Chuck Schumer especially saying, hey, look, we're getting a lot more done in the minority when we're in the minority than when we were in the majority. Yes, it's not a good thing. But anyway, it's spilled milk, and we have to move on. And I think it's important to remember that in any situation, God has a way to move on and to continue to make progress towards the eventual victory of His will. We know that the victory of God's will, the establishment of His kingdom and of His original ideal, is predestined. It is just up to human beings, up to us to fulfill our 5% portion of responsibility. And as soon as we get around to doing that, His will be accomplished. Let's see what else is going on. Dow is down 1,400 points for the week. That's the worst week in a very long time. Saudi Arabia opens the airspace to Israel for the first time. Well, that sounds like good news. Growing questions about CNN airport monopoly as network veers left. Yes. So, anyone who's been to an airport, which is probably almost all of us, knows that CNN is on. CNN broadcast is on those TV sets, TV monitors 24/7. And there's more growing questions about that. That's good. A man arrested for threatening to murder a Republican congressman because he was upset over pot policy. I read this story, and apparently this man has some history with this particular Republican congressman. This happened in Virginia, a Republican congressman in Virginia, and he has history, and he made some very direct threats, and not only to the congressman, but to his staff as well. Jan Wenner, hashtag #MeToo is a witch hunt, suffers from absence of due process. You don't say? Well, that's about time people started saying that. Missed connections, Craigslist shuts down personal ads after sex trafficking bill passes. And we have a section here on Analytica and the Facebook situation. Cloak and data behind Analytica's rise and fall. UK warrant to search between fake news and data harvesting. Facebook has no way to win. Of course, Analytica is under fire for having mined Facebook data because Analytica was connected to the Trump campaign. But it turns out that Facebook has done this for others as well, for many others as well. And so Facebook is under fire for that. Their stock is down quite a bit. A woman sues over personal info being released, and Musk takes down Tesla and SpaceX pages on Facebook. And Beijing fury after U.S. sails near to disputed South Sea Isles. And China bans TV parodies among content crackdown. Yes, I think there were some articles in the past written about humor in Nazi Germany. It's difficult for comedians to work in dictatorships. Of course, in medieval royal courts, the court jester, who was basically a comedian, was there to entertain the king, but also the jester was an important political presence as well, because the jester could say things that other people couldn't, in the guise of jokes or parody or something like that. And the wise king would sometimes take the jester seriously, take those jokes seriously, and correct his course. Unwise kings would execute the jester when he got too far out of line. Apparently, Xi Jinping is of the latter type of a dictator who executes court jesters. Update to fiery crash at Travis Air Force Base investigated as terrorism. As there was a strange thing that happened there. They're not quite sure what it was about, but they're investigating it as terrorism. It was a traffic. What was it? Fox has a little bit more on this. Fox this morning. terrorism or not, driver's crash, fiery death at Air Force Base confounds investigators. So anyway, they're still confounded. All right. Elsewhere, let's see. Stormy Daniels' lawyer posts photo of mystery disc and safe, teasing a picture. Ex-Playboy model apologizes to First Lady for 10-month affair she claims she had with Trump. BET boots journalist from Michelle Obama conference. Pope defrocks 9 monks for rogue exorcisms. And Vatican cracks down on critics. Cracking down on critics. Xi Jinping and Vatican. 2 peas in a pod, seems like. PBS details that Travis Smiley's alleged sex misconduct persistently pursued subordinates for sex. USA charges 9 Iranians in massive scheme. Democrat fuel for House majority. Suburban discontent. And let's see, the Manhattan luxury home market screaming, I'm overpriced. So if you're in the market for a luxury home in Manhattan, maybe better wait a while. NFL star indicted for shoving elderly paraplegic at the Super Bowl. And LA considers proposal to give housing to all homeless. What could go wrong? South Korea to turn computers off in the evening, forcing people to stop working. Blasting Mozart, pot arrests. Miami mulls ways to control spring break. The Mozart will work. But why Mozart? Why not the Bee Gees? I'll bet the Bee Gees would work just as well. Maybe copyright issues, I don't know. A water slide and fatal accident considered deadly weapon. Very tragic situation there. A woman cooks her chihuahua because she thought her boyfriend was inside the dog. Sounds like somebody was on drugs. Let's see. All right, but today, what's happening today is that there is this march going on in Washington, D.C. A bunch of kids are gathering there from around the country to protest guns. It's an anti-gun march. And they believe, in their young minds, that marching against guns and outlawing guns, banning guns by law, will make their schools safer. Of course, it will not. We know that statistics show that when you get rid of guns, violent crime increases overall. And we know that this school violence really has become an issue ever since the 1990, when the federal government decided to pass this law that makes all schools gun-free zones. According to this 1990 law that was proposed by Senator Joe Biden, and was signed into law by H.W. Bush, says that you cannot have a gun within 1,000 feet of a school zone. And it's since that law was passed that we've had this problem with gun violence, that is to say, mass shootings on school grounds. So it would seem logical that these kids would want to demonstrate against that law. But let's see, 1990, they were not born. Well, maybe, yeah, they were not born when that law was passed. So maybe they haven't heard about it. And this march today in Washington is left-wing directed and funded, according to Breitbart. Left-wing directed and funded teens descend on D.C. for anti-gun March for Our Lives, is the top story on Breitbart. And they have a photograph there, kids holding some signs there in front of what looks like the U.S. Capitol building. NRA equals bloodshed. Here we see that. Can't really read the other signs there, but A March 1st announced by students from a Florida high school where 17 people were shot and killed has morphed into a worldwide anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment, anti-Trump protest directed, promoted, and funded by left-wing adults and adult-led organizations. Yeah, so it's been totally co-opted. Trump's Pentagon deep sixes Obama's transgender ideology. Yes, that's something else that's going on today, or happened yesterday. That is, President Trump has a, let's see, Trump allows current transgender troops but bans future recruits. That's the headline in the Wall Street Journal. White House announces ban on most transgender troops is CBS News. And Fox News says President Trump issues order to ban transgender troops from service except in limited circumstances. Okay, and then let's see, going back now to Breitbart. Chinese government determined to strike back against tariffs. Noti, far-left CNN's airport dominance under fire. Omnibus bill allows more illegal aliens to be released into U.S. through catch and release. Chuck gets his tunnel. We're able to accomplish more in the minority. Carolyn Glick, John Bolton's appointment is an America First move. But Bill Maher says Bolton, what they call an a-hole is a-hole. Well, he's not far off on that. A school district arms students with rocks to stop mass shooters. This is actually happening in Pennsylvania, in Schuylkill County. This school has provided each classroom, and I kid you not, they've provided each class, this is true, each classroom with a 5-gallon bucket full of river rocks. And the idea is that when somebody starts coming in with their AR-15 and starts da-da-da-da-da-da-da, then you pick up these river rocks and you throw them at the shooter. All right? Absolutely serious. You don't believe this? And the Breitbart has a photograph of a painting of David going up against Goliath with a rock in his slingshot. Anyway, let's read this article just to hear. This is, you got to believe this. The superintendent of Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania's Blue Mountain School District, says his students avail themselves of rocks with which to defend against mass shooters. WNEP reports that Superintendent Dr. David Helsel, I guess I pronounced that, told the Pennsylvania House Education Committee every classroom has been equipped with a 5-gallon bucket of Riverstone. If an armed intruder attempts to gain entrance into any of our classrooms, they will face a classroom full of students armed with rocks, and they will be stoned. This is so tragic. This is so, oh my goodness. Helsel explained how the plan to throw rocks came about. At one time, I just had the idea of Riverstone. They're the right size for hands. You can throw them very hard, and they will create or cause pain, which can distract. He stressed that doors have been reinforced, making them difficult to break through, and students have also been trained in barricading the doors to make breaching them even more difficult, but the students are armed with rocks in the event that a shooter does get through. An unidentified Blue Mountain School District senior indicated that he likes the plan, saying it matters because it will help protect the schools. Anything helps. Rocks are better than books and pencils. Well, I suppose that's true. Yeah, better than books and pencils. Yes. At least one parent supports using rocks as a defensive measure as well, but others in the district mocked the idea. An unidentified parent called the idea absurd and said teachers ought to be armed. Dr. Helsel said the district has no plans to arm teachers for school safety. Oh, boy. So now all the mass shooters in the world know that this Blue Mountain School District in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, is only armed with rocks. Well, maybe they'll go someplace else where they throw books and pencils. Let's hope so. Let's hope that we actually are able to stop them even before that. Danny Tarkanian takes commanding lead in Nevada 3rd District. Cuba adopts a Trump-style slogan for leftist summit, Latin America first. Mass stranding kills almost 150 pilot whales. Hope for troublesome weight loss, freezing the hunger nerve. North Korea has said nothing yet about Trump-Kim meeting. This is true. And in fact, the State Department has confirmed this. The State Department confirms silence from North Korea on Trump-Kim meeting. well, this is not too surprising. The North Korea's, they put up a balloon to see what the reaction would be. And they got their reaction. And if Trump had said no, then they would be using that for propaganda purpose. But Trump said yes. And now North Korea has the option of whether to go ahead with the meeting or not. Because they never really said that they wanted to have this meeting. They told the South Koreans that they would like, Kim Jong-un told the South Koreans that they'd like to have, wouldn't it be nice to have this kind of meeting? And the South Koreans relayed that message to Trump. But, the North Koreans can always come up with an excuse. And they are going ahead with preparations for a North Korea-South Korea meeting. And that's fine because, that's just a meeting of friends. I mean, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, they basically share the same philosophy. And basically Kim Jong-un has won the contest on who is going to control the Korean Peninsula. Moon Jae-in is basically his errand boy now. The North-South Korea summit is a pretty risk-free situation for North Korea. Of course, the North Korea-U.S. meeting would be a much more risky situation. And so they want to see what happens, how much they can control the South through this first meeting with Moon Jae-in. And then after that, they will assess and decide what to do about the meeting with Trump. They'll probably come up with some conditions that the U.S. cannot accept, and then the meeting will be canceled, I expect. I don't really expect it that it's going to happen. Missing Iowa family found dead during Mexican vacation. Mexico is having more and more problems with tourists ending up dead, don't they? ESPN Smith, the Copernic, loves the fact that he's been martyred. Anthem protester Bennett charged with injury to elderly paraplegic. China's 100-year plan for world domination by John Hayward. We can get into that. Let's see. U.S. denies backing Turkey's expansion of anti-Kurdish Syrian invasion. Taliban invites anti-U.S. jihadists to establish an Islamic system and reconciliation. Let's see. The spending bill that Trump signed does not fund 1,000 new deportation agents that Trump requested. That spending bill was just overall a bad thing for Trump. And, he seems to have gone through sort of a struggle trying to decide whether to veto it or to sign it. And in the end, for some reason or another, he chose to sign it. I guess only he can really know what tipped him into that direction. But it seems that in his heart, he realizes that this was a bad thing. And I wonder, as he wakes up this morning, whether he's feeling that he made a mistake yesterday. But anyway, like I said, it's water under the bridge, spilled milk. And we have to move on, and God will move on. So the important thing now is to figure out what we need to do in our current situation to move forward towards a God's ideal world. Always there's a line. There's always a straight line. And Father was always aware of this straight line, where it began, where it ended. And that straight line is a line that connects our current position, at 5:23 a.m. on March 24th, 2018, our current time, and God's ideal. And of course, this end is always stationary. God's ideal is stationary and absolute. This always moves, It can move right, left, it can go forward, sometimes it goes backwards. This is always moving. Sometimes it's, up here or up there. But there's always a line, a straight line, between where we are and where we want to go. Father was always aware of exactly where that line was. And so he would always seek to make one step along that line towards God's ideal. A step in this direction, for example, let's say in a northeasterly direction, would be okay if the beginning point is here. But if you're over here and you make a northeasterly step, then you're going in the wrong direction. Here, you would have to make a northwesterly step, right? Everything is backwards, I know, because of the camera. So anyway, Here, Donald Trump, 10 hours ago, tweeted as follows: "As a matter of national security, I've signed the Omnibus spending bill. I say to Congress, I will never sign another bill like this again. To prevent this omnibus situation from ever happening again, I'm calling on Congress to give me a line item veto for all government spending bills." Mr. President, that's not going to happen. This line item veto thing has been discussed in the past, and it's never gotten any traction. The line item veto, for those who have graduated from schools where civics is no longer taught, is this: that in the Constitution gives the president the power to veto, but he has to veto or sign or allow to go into law a bill in its whole. He cannot go through a bill and say, well, I don't like this, I'm going to veto this part. That's not allowed under the Constitution. Now, the Supreme Court can do that. The courts can do that. The courts can say, this part of this bill is unconstitutional, so we're saying that it's unconstitutional, so we're saying that it will no longer have any effect. The courts can do that, but the president cannot under the Constitution. The president has to take a whole bill, a whole bill, and either sign it or veto it or allow it to go into law by not signing it. And so Trump is now asking for a line item veto power, and I think that would take an amendment to the Constitution, if I'm correct. But anyway, it's not going to happen because that would diminish the power of Congress by a substantial margin, and Congress is not going to vote to diminish their own power. It's just not going to happen. This omnibus spending bill, yeah. I think the solution to this kind of thing is the Chandragupta Constitution, where sovereignty and power is shifted to the local level. I think that's just the way to deal with this kind of situation, to cut down the size of the federal government. Okay, so he said he signed it as a matter of national security, so I guess he had his eyes on that $700 billion for the military, and apparently he felt that was necessary, and so he went ahead and signed this bill. Unfortunate. But anyway, let's move on. Let's take a break before we move on, and then we'll come back and we'll start going through some of these congressional candidates in the 8th District of Pennsylvania. Let's see who we have. All right, see you in a minute.
that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially, it's just absolutely gorgeous.
All polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah. Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah, just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah, model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run, under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about, what, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum, but it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So
that sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for March 24th, 2018. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Jin-moon. And in this segment, and for much of the remainder of this morning's broadcast, I want to talk about the 8th District of Pennsylvania. We have a midterm election coming up in November, and prior to that, there will be primaries held by each party, the Republicans at least, and the Democrats too, I suppose, on May 15th. And the deadline for running for federal office in Pennsylvania, to run for federal office in Pennsylvania, was last Tuesday. And so a lot of people filed, and so we know who's running and for what office and which area and which district and so forth. Now, as we've been discussing for weeks now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court unilaterally decreed a new congressional district map for Pennsylvania. This is against the Pennsylvania Constitution. It's against the United States Constitution. But it is what it is. We live under a dictatorship, and when you live under a dictatorship, there's nothing you can do about it. We have to go along. That's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And this is the type of situation where it would be good if we were living under the Cheongguk Constitution, because when the Supreme Court acts in an unconstitutional manner, then we can take the case to the king. And then, so the king is one more stage of appeal that we can make. And it's the king's responsibility to make sure that our rights are protected. In this case, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court acted against the Pennsylvania Constitution, and in the U.S. Supreme Court failed in its responsibility to overrule the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and also failed in its responsibility to uphold the U.S. Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution was violated in this case as well. But anyway, so we are no longer in the 10th District of Pennsylvania. Under the new map decreed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we are in the 8th District. And Tom Marino, who is our current congressman until the end of this year, will no longer be our congressman next year. He's running in another district. He is now living in the 12th District, because he lives in Williamsport, which is a town or a small city a little bit west of here. He lives in Williamsport, and that's no longer a part of the same district as we are living in, as the king is living in. And so he is running in the 12th District. And there's a company called Rasmussen Reports, which looks at various races around the country and various, districts and so forth, and they actually analyze the districts, and they predict who's going to win, or whether this district is strongly Republican or leans Republican or leans Democrat or is a strong Democrat. They call it maybe safe Democrat and a safe Republican. And well, the good news is that according to Rasmussen.com, RasmussenReports.com, Tom Marino is in a safe Republican district. That's the 12th district, and so it looks like he's going to be reelected this coming midterm. And so we're happy about that. He's a good man, and we like him very much, and it's good that he's probably going to be able to continue serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, but not representing our district, but another district. Our district, meanwhile, RasmussenReports.com rates as being likely Democratic. Likely Democratic. Because we have a congressman his name is Matt Cartwright. He's a Democrat, and he's currently a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and he's been representing Scranton area until now. And he is a person that Gun Owners of America gives him a rating of 10% out of 100. That's not a good rating. That's a very bad rating, actually. For Gun Owners of America to say, this person agrees with us only 10% of the time. This is not good. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood gives him something like 86% rating. It means that 86% of the time he agrees with Planned Parenthood. So Matt Cartwright is going, unless Republicans can put up a strong candidate who can defeat him, Matt Cartwright will continue to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives as a representative of the 8th Pennsylvania District. And that 8th District now includes the Cheonryung Palace and the Sanctuary Church. So this is the man that we have to go to if we want something done in the U.S. House of Representatives. So it's important that we get someone who can defeat Matt Cartwright in the November election. And that will be decided at the May 15th primary, the Republican primary. And there are 3 Republicans who have filed to run for that opportunity to defeat Matt Cartwright in the 8th District. They are John Trinh. Let me bring up that list right now. They are John Trinh and John Knugle and Joseph Peters, Joe Peters. These are the 3 people. And so I want to talk about these 3 people, and also I want to play interviews that they have done. And in the interviews, you will talk about how, I'm running for the 11th district, or I'm running for the 17th district. These are the old districts, all right? And these interviews were done prior to the finalization of the new districts, which only happened, last Saturday or this Monday or something like that? Anyways, it was very, very recent. And so ignore that. These 3 people are running in the new 8th District of Pennsylvania. Right, let's bring up John Trinh's. Okay, we already have that. John Trinh for Congress, his website. And let me go through some of his information. He is a former Wall Street executive. And anyway, let's go ahead and play his interview, because he introduces himself in this interview. So let's let him speak for himself. John Trinh.
It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesant Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesant.
Can we get some volume here?
John Trinh. He's a Republican and he's running for the 17th congressional district.
Can we get some volume?
Area. And we're each month, as you know, we're filling you in on what's going on. And the interesting thing, folks, we're telling you truths. We're telling you facts. We're not making.
Is everybody else
up,
able to hear this?
like we've found.
I wish I could hear it too.
That's happened with a lot of other politicians. Well, John, thanks for coming on the show again. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
I was just telling you, you're really riled up with this campaign, aren't you?
All right, well, we'll just let it play for 15 minutes. I cannot share it, but I watched most of it already. Okay, all right, thank you.
In people's minds, the families, the hardworking people that are out there, and what they want the government to do for them.
A synopsis of you, okay, before we get into the meat of the show, where people are, I think, been misled, but however, you're the expert in that. Give me us a little bit about what you've done. I mean, some of your background.
Sure. I mean, Sam, so as I've said to the viewers from the beginning, I think it's important to understand who I am as a person. I'm a 10th generation Pennsylvanian who spent the first 24 years of my life in this state. I've been a paper boy, a union laborer, an engineer, a banker, an investor, a small business owner. I've seen the full spectrum of what takes place in the economy, and I think that's something in terms of that perspective which could add a real positive in Washington in trying to improve the lives of the people that live in the 17th Congressional District.
Okay, so now what we have, all right, and we have some very serious concerns in the country. Unfortunately, the congressional opinion rate in the country is very low, okay, which means to tell you that they don't really trust a lot of people who are in Washington today. Now, you're an expert in the finance field, or you wouldn't be where you are and have, consulted many major companies, and we want to get specific, but you've had that experience. How many lawyers do we have in Congress?
Too many.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't know the exact number.
But it's a high percentage.
It's much higher. So what I can tell you is if you look at the number of people that have any type of banking background, it's 16.
Yeah.
Okay.
16 members.
16 members total in both the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Yeah. That's like saying I want to go and get operated on, and you go to accountants, etc., and not going to the specific doctors. And this is where I think I applaud you, as I said. Every month you're bringing information. Now, we're going to get a little bit more specific today. Yep. Recently, we've had Matthew Cartwright, who is the current congressman, say at a meeting in Scranton that this tax bill is terrible. It's going to cost manufacturing jobs. Now, that's an assumption he's doing. Okay, it's going to cost manufacturing jobs. Now, my only concern there is, and I'm sure you'll tell me the details, because you have the bill right here. And if I'm wrong, John, I want to be corrected. Matthew Cartwright supported Hillary Clinton to become presidency. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Hillary Clinton stated that she wanted to put the coal industry out of business. That was her objective. So if you're going to support someone, unless there was a statement made by Matthew Cartwright who said, Hillary, I'm not for this, but I cannot be for you putting the coal industry out of business. So he was prepared, and he did support Hillary Clinton, who wanted to put the coal industry out of business, costing thousands of jobs in his own district. Am I correct in saying that?
Sam, if he was supporting Hillary, by definition, that would be true.
Okay.
So look, I mean, I would just say that let's focus on where we are today. Yeah. Let's focus on moving forward.
Tell me what you see in this tax bill, okay, because from what we understand, okay, and of course the liberal media will not present that, is this a good thing?
Sam, so all I can tell you is that when I look at it and objectively stand back, this bill is substantially better than where we are today. Okay, for two reasons. The most important of which is in the short term, middle-class working families will see a reduction in their taxes. That's a good thing. I think anytime you can put several $1,000s in someone's pocket after taxes, that's not a bad thing. Is it perfect? No. Are there ways that you could potentially tweak the bill at some point in the future in terms of the law and make it better? Yes. More importantly, what it does is actually set up the economy in terms of the change in the corporate tax rate. And by the way, it's not just for big corporations, it's for small businesses, mid-sized corporations. It really puts the United States on a level playing field with the rest of the world. Because you know what, if you're thinking about where you want to make an investment, to build a plant, to buy a piece of equipment, to start a new business, if you're going to do it in a country where the tax burden at the corporate level is higher than other places, guess what? You don't need to be a mathematician to say, yeah, I'm going to go someplace else and put the factory there. So it's nonsensical to say that you're going to have jobs leave because you cut the rate. That doesn't make sense.
Matthew Cartwright said on the news, okay, this is going to cut manufacturing jobs.
Don't get it. Don't get that. That is just.
To me, it would be just the opposite.
It is. Sam, I mean, anybody who's been around business, that is one of the most nonsensical things that you would ever say in terms of lowering a corporate rate is going to actually have jobs leave. I'm sorry, that's not the case. Now, there are a whole bunch of other things that factor into a corporation or a board's decision, an entrepreneur's decision about whether or not they want to invest more money. The most important of which, are they going to get a fair return? Okay, are they going to get a fair return of the capital that they put at risk? But this is a bill that people have to have patience with, okay? Because when you make a change like this at the corporate level, it's like an aircraft carrier. You can't turn on a dime, okay? And the U.S. economy is an aircraft carrier. It's the biggest in the world. We should be proud of what we've built as a country, given the innovativeness and everything around it. And a change like this is very profound. The fact that Congress is on the brink of actually passing something faster and as broad as what President Reagan did in a shorter time period, I mean, we should be looking at this saying, yes, this is potentially a very good thing. Give it time to work through the economy, because I really believe that if we look out 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we're going to see growth in the U.S. economy that is absolutely above where it would have been before this bill was passed. Because U.S. corporations, entrepreneurs in this country, are going to make investments here. And that's going to create jobs, and it's going to create jobs that are going to be good paying of the new economy.
They keep on throwing the fact, and the Democrats have a habit of doing this when they want votes. They keep on throwing fear in the people and saying that it's for the rich. This is only for the rich, and the rich are going to benefit. And of course, give me your response to that.
So Sam, I can tell you, although I'm spending a lot of time back home now in Pennsylvania, okay, the friends that I have in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Illinois, and California that are wealthy are lamenting. Okay, they think this is the worst thing that's ever possibly happened, because they're going to be paying higher taxes. But you know what? That's actually, again, that's not so bad, because if you've done well in this country, shame on you if you're not going to pay a little bit more.
Let me ask you this again, okay? Because here again, I said that we're only dealing with facts here, okay? And sometimes facts are ugly things. So you're telling me when Senator Casey, Bobby Casey, gets up and tells people that, that it's for the, well, I don't know if he said specifically, but I heard comments, it's for the rich. This is going to help the rich. It's going to help the rich. You're saying it's just the opposite.
The people that I've spoken with, their accountants have told them, based on the bill that is going to be voted on, that they will be paying substantially higher rates. Part of that, Sam, comes from the fact that they're no longer going to be able to deduct the high property taxes that they pay in those states, the high income taxes that they pay in those states, and the high city taxes that they pay in the places that they live. And you know what? The reason that may actually put some pressure now on the politicians that run those states and those cities to actually focus on the fact that they can't be looking to the federal government and taxpayers around the country to support those states. They need to get their own house in order. And you know what? I don't think that's a bad thing. And certainly people in Pennsylvania should not be supporting people in California.
Mm-hmm. All right, so sticking with this tax bill,
yep.
Okay, because, my personal opinion is, being around a long time, is that when you have Santa Claus, you don't want to vote against Santa Claus. And the more things you can give away in the country, that's why people will keep you in office. Okay, and I think once this settles in, it's going to be fantastic for the country. And what are the Democrats going to say? So I'm thinking it's something like a sabotage on their part, as Trump said, and it's a sabotage not to see what's going to actually happen, but put the fear in these people, okay, that it's going to happen. Now, am I correct in making that statement?
So here, this is the thing that's disheartening. So I've never run for office before, so I just look practically common sense, okay?
Yeah. Okay, don't do that.
If you have something that's going to impact everybody in this country, even if your party leadership, even if Nancy Pelosi is telling you not to vote for this, have a backbone, get involved, get a seat at the table, try to contribute. If you don't like what's in there, offer positive suggestions in terms of how the legislation can get changed. And you know what? Marco Rubio did that, the senator from Florida. And I applaud him because what he did is he came back and said, you know what? This tax bill, there were more, there's a lot of things that were going potentially to the corporations. Why don't we go through and increase the child credit, okay, and make a higher percentage of that that's refundable to families that don't make a lot of money? Great thing, Sam. So there I would say that's an individual who, yes, he's a Republican, but he didn't like things and he voiced his opinion and they were able to make a change. How is that bad in terms of if you're a family and now you have children and you're going to get a higher credit and potentially a bigger refund, even if you don't pay the taxes in?
So my question again, it's a stupid question, and I get confused, and people get upset about me when I say these things, is that you mean to tell me that Matthew Cartwright, Senator Kennedy, and Nancy Pelosi don't have this information that you have?
Well, they do. I mean, but they're going to spin it in, so look, the best thing...
Why do you think they're against this bill?
Because they can't take the credit for it. And you know what? Credit is one of those things that everybody in Washington is working for the American people. And whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, who cares? Let's get something done that's good for the American people. And bringing back all the overseas profits of corporations because they have an ability to bring it back at a slightly reduced rate, that's good. Lowering the rate for hard-working middle-class people, that's a good thing. Making U.S. corporations more competitive, that's a good thing. Share the credit, get to the table, work for the people. Don't be an obstructionist.
Remember I said on the show, ideology? Mm-hmm. Lady came up to me, she said, you know, Mr. Osan, I wanted to ask you what you meant by ideology. I said, very simple. Go to the computer, Google the Democrat platform. I know I'm being redundant here, and Google the Republican platform. And you will see what their mission statement is for the Democrats, and you will see, and ideology sits there, okay? So no matter how good Trump does or whatever, you have that ideology. People want to become socialists, okay? So here you are, John, okay? You are going to be fighting an element, okay? Because they love power. They lost power, and they want it back, okay? When they had it, look what happened to our country. What was happening with our country when Obama was in with his crew?
So what happened is we had thousands, tens of thousands of increased regulations that were mandated by the federal government, some by presidential decree, okay? And what we've seen over the last 12 months, okay, is an unbelievable unleashing of positiveness in the business community, whether it's a small business, a mid-sized business, a big business, okay? They feel that they are now unshackled. They can go out, they can do what they do best, be creative, create jobs, make money for the investors in their country. And Sam, you know where the best reflection of that is? In the stock market. And you know what? That's not just for wealthy people, because if you're a teacher, if you're a fireman, if you're a policeman, anybody who has a pension, you're benefiting.
Your 401ks,
okay?
yeah.
Your 401k, your IRA.
And they're going up.
Right. Why? Because there's a positiveness in the country that says, finally, we're going to be in a period where we're going to be able to make rational decisions and get rewarded for the investments that we make. So that's why it's disheartening to see the fear-mongering that goes on, the finger-pointing. But you know what? It may not be perfect.
Folks, as you tune in, I'm talking to John Trin. He's running the...
Okay, so that is John Trin. Looking a little bit further at his profile on his website here, go to the tab called Issues. We see that on economy and jobs, he says, drawing on his experience as a successful businessman, John Trin is enthusiastic about the economic opportunities for Northeast Pennsylvania. Nestled between the high-tax states of New York and New Jersey, Northeast Pennsylvania is uniquely positioned to harness its assets and capitalize on the businesses fleeing high costs of living. Northeast Pennsylvania offers a dedicated and talented workforce for employers, but we need a plan for success. he says. And then on education, as a product of public schools in Northeast PA, John Tren feels strongly that public education is not living up to its potential in our country. Let's see. He doesn't say anything about homeschooling there, so far as I can see. And immigration system is broken. Okay, and Second Amendment, John Tren is a strong supporter of the Second Amendment and a lifetime member of the NRA. So he's a lifetime member of the NRA. John understands the importance of gun rights when it comes to self-defense, hunting, and home protection. These rights were enshrined in our Constitution because they are essential to our liberty. On health care, he says that Obamacare is not working. It has failed in providing affordable quality coverage and is driving up rates for everyone. John Tren supports a health care system that puts patients first, allows small businesses to pool together to purchase plans, allows for the purchase of health insurance across state lines, and encourages competition. And on pro-life, John Tren is pro-life and will protect the sanctity of life. So I think that gives you a fairly good idea of a feeling of John Tren. Now, this interview that we just played is actually only the first half of a 30-minute interview, and it's only one of 6 interviews that he has listed on his website. So you can go there and look at all 6, but I don't think we have time for that this morning. All right, next let's go to Robert Knugle. Robert Knugle is of Springbrook Township in Lackawanna County. And let's go to his interview on the same Sam Lassant show. Can we play that interview now?
Talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, the Sam Lassant Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lassant.
Thanks, my friends, for joining us. I'm Sam Lassant. And folks, you know, I'm taking you on a journey of trying to educate you as to what's going to happen 2018 in the elections. And what we're doing is we have people coming on who are talking about their concerns as to why they want to run for office. Today I have Bob Conogo. Bob is running in the 17th Congressional District Republican ticket. And Bob is here today to tell us why you should vote for him for the 7th Congressional District. Bob, thanks for coming on the show.
I'm grateful for having the opportunity to talk to your audience about politics.
And you know, we always said, a friend of mine said to me many years ago, Bob, good politicians make for good government, you know, and that's, notice I said good politicians. Bob, for people who know you, they know, you know, you have a tremendous background here. Tell us a little bit about who you are, you know, your background and, you know, something about your family and etc.
Well, I think the story does start with my, 3 of my grandparents were immigrants. 2 came from Poland, my Georgi and Babki, as we call them. And my another grandfather on my mother's side came from Sicily. And my grandmother, she was what you would call a Heinz 57, but predominantly Welsh, if there was anything, maybe 20%. I was closest, I think, to that grandmother. She had some really neat sayings, like talk is cheap, but it takes money to buy beer. Now, she wasn't a drinker, but that's the same as, you know, people talk, but it's the deeds that they do that make the difference. And I have a number of deeds that I did over the years that I think tells a little bit about myself.
Share some.
Well, when I was in my 20s, Lackawanna County was going to build a recycling center, and I was interested in recycling. Since I was young, I knew that it was something that people should do. So I called the architect and I offered my services, and he actually hired me as a volunteer to go look at different places, and I had some input on the Lackawanna County recycling plant. And then later on in my career, when I was a corrections officer, after about 3 or 4 years, they give you an opportunity to take an unpaid sabbatical if you like. So I took 4 months off, and I was very interested in Theodore Roosevelt. because I feel that he's an excellent role model. And I purchased books that were out of copyright and scanned them and put them on the internet. I have a website, tramericanpatriot.com. There's nothing for sale on that website, or there's no advertising. It's just free books by Theodore Roosevelt, people that knew him, American history books. And I've done some other things in my life that are civic-minded.
You know, you have a college education, so this opportunity that you're looking at, you know, you got a challenge here you want to run for U.S. Congress. I'm sure you know all the, you know, what you're going to be involved with. So what was the reason why, you know, you decided that you want to run for Congress? And what did your wife of 43 years, you've been married 43 years, that's an accomplishment. What did she think when you told her that?
Well,
other than you're crazy, you know?
Actually, no. She's been telling me my whole life that I should run for office because she knows that's where my interest has been. I've always had an interest in national politics. And I don't, maybe it's because when I joined the service, you take an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. And I wasn't in Vietnam, but I was in the service during that time period. I was in the Navy. And I went to the Mediterranean. We didn't go to NAM. But that might be some of what gives me an interest in national politics, making early choices, whether you were willing to fight and die for your country, because at one time when I was a junior in high school, I thought that I might be a Marine. I don't take choices like that without really thinking about them. But what really got me interested now that I have the time being retired, I've provided for my family. That's the first thing you have to do in your life. And I have the time now, and I am totally disgusted with the corruption in government. Totally disgusted. It's become a national security issue, actually, all of the corruption. And I'd like to do something about it. I only have one fight left in me, and I want to fight for America for the next generation.
Well, you have here, you said, I'm running for Congress because I'm totally sick about the in-your-face corruption in Washington, okay? So, and I guess that's probably what Trump's theme is, draining the swamp. And he's having a difficult time with the media because they like what it is, and their old friends are there, in my opinion. So you saw this, okay? So now, all right, having a thought of saying, I'm tired of it, what do you intend to do about it if you should become a congressman?
Well, I have two proposals, and maybe I should go into my blue-collar working history. I think that leads into the why I have two proposals. One hat that I wore all through my life was a laborer. I do construction work. I actually build places, too, for futuristic houses, energy-efficient homes. I got into that later in life, but I've always had a blue collar on, and I've also had a white collar on for 33 years. We started a hair salon and have kept 5 people employed over the years. And that's gave me a lot of experience with business. One of the main things wrong with business right now, people don't really want to talk about it, but we have a hard time finding employees because the government is paying people not to work.
Isn't it sad?
It really is. It really is.
No work ethics.
Well, you can't really blame the people if the government's giving it to them. I have a background too. I had a great Uncle Billy. He was great. But he taught me like the wilderness and hunting and things like that. If you take a wild animal and you feed it, you know, it's not going to provide for itself. So we're providing for people, and we're stealing their incentive off them to work.
Yeah, Bob, you know why that is. Why they like to have people depend on them is because they want the votes. And that's what you're having right now with the extreme left going crazy because the economy is growing, people are getting more jobs, and you're 100% correct. And so the more you can give people things for nothing, well, the more they're going to vote for you. Well, when that stops, you earn what you're saying. But here again, and Bob, we had some discussions you and I had on the phone. When you're looking at people, okay, who need help, we're there to help them. And I think you feel that way.
Correct. You really have to. My grandmother, she worked in a dress factory when I knew her growing up. But at some point in her history, she had received welfare. Maybe it was during the Depression or sometime before that. But she got off welfare, and she worked the rest of her life when she was old. It should be a helping hand, not a lifestyle. That's where we make the problem, and it's short-sightedness on politicians' mindset. And actually, I have a proposal that actually deals with that a little bit. But let me go back to the construction background. I've taken some shacks, actually, and I've turned them into things, not hiring architects, but looking at the problem, what had to be done, and figuring out solutions. And in construction, if you're good at it, you build tools to make your job easy. And I was good at it, so I have a number of properties that I've remodeled. They're energy efficient. I came up with solutions during the energy crisis. I studied, well, what could I do to be more energy efficient? That was during the Carter years, 70s. And one of the things I found was masonry mass inside a home is an excellent way to conserve energy. So I've incorporated that into most of my homes. But it's a matter of solving problems. So my background gives me that opportunity to look and see, hey, there's a problem here. We have all of this corruption. What can we do to try and do something about it? One of the things is we need more people involved. So I was on the internet while I was at the University of Scranton. I worked 11 years at the University of Scranton, getting my daughters a free education when I gave up labor union construction work. And I also attended school at that time and received a bachelor's in criminal justice. But I was on a discussion group, and over a period of several years, we discussed seriously how to build an electronic town hall and the merits of it.
Electronic town hall?
Yes.
Okay.
What that is, it gives the people a way to become involved discussing issues. Mm-hmm. And there's several different levels to it. They not only discuss issues, they discuss them with the opposite side. So you would have Democrats and you would have Republicans discussing issues. And it would be all documented because you'd be doing it in writing on the internet, and then other people would look at it, all the information, and they would give an opinion. And that would be an informed opinion poll, which is completely different to what the media uses to manipulate people today.
Bob, folks, if you just tuned in, I'm talking to Bob Conegal, and his website is congresspa.com. congresspa.com. Phone number for Bob, and the reason why I'm giving you a phone number is we're looking for some petitions he'd like to get signed, and his number is 570-842-8043. And remember, download the app, SSP TV, and you can watch this show anywhere to learn about who's running for office. And so it's congresspa.com. Phone number is on the screen, 570-842-8043. I didn't mean that, but I want people to know that they, as they're going through the channels. So, Bob, the electronic town hall. So this is interesting. That how would people then become involved with this?
Well, the first thing we have to do, and I'm hopefully we're not going to have this for my tenure. If I make it in Congress, it will take a few years to set up. the mechanics of it isn't that hard. The first thing I have to do is educate the people, telling them that there is an information age solution, and describe that we have a need for it. And when the people decide that, yes, I want this, you can some of the mechanics of making it happen. It's just a matter of desire on the part of the people, but they don't really understand what it is yet. And when you have an informed opinion poll, then you can sift through a lot of the garbage.
Sure.
And then other people can come along and look at the informed opinion poll and look at the major points. They can look at the whole thing if they want, because it's all documented. And then you could really start to deal with issues, because you'll have people with good ideas that are going to have a voice, because other people look at their ideas and they say, yes, I like that. And then the politicians would listen.
You know, it's interesting because here you are, Bob Conagle, running for Congress in the 17th Congressional District. I'll make sure you get it correct. Now, you know, you're retired. You worked. You have a good operation business. So why do you think it's important? I mean, I'm running these shows. Yes, they're paid for, but I'm running these shows to try to educate people to who they're putting in office, because it affects our lives, as you saw. So here you are. You're married 43 years. You can just live the life of Riley, as they say. Why is it so important for people, number one, to see who's running for office, and number two, why they should get involved, either voting or become involved?
Well, coming involved is easy for me, I think, to answer. I just reread a book that I have on my bookshelf at home. It's
I think we could stop it
President
about
Adams,
there.
our second president.
We can stop it about there. That's Robert Conagle, who's running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 8th District, not the 17th District. This interview was done prior to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court unilaterally decreeing a new district map. So he was running in the 17th, but now he's running in the 8th District. And he's one of 3 people who are running for to become the Republican candidate in the November election against Democrat Matthew Cartwright. Matthew Cartwright is a very liberal, I think we can say probably liberal, not just capital L, but all caps liberal. He supported Hillary Clinton. He has a 10% rating from the Gun Owners of America, meaning that from the judgment of Gun Owners of America, he agrees with them only 10% of the time, whereas Planned Parenthood gives him a very high rating. I think it was something like 86%, or I think it was something like 86%. So Matthew Cartwright is not someone who understands where God wants to go in terms of the direction for America, for the direction of Pennsylvania. And let's remember that whoever wins the seat in Pennsylvania's 8th District is someone who needs to be working with the king. We've been working a lot with Tom Marino, and Tom Marino has been a good partner for the king. So now that Tom Marino is running for in a different district, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court took him away from us. So now whoever wins this election in November is going to have the responsibility to work with the king in the way that Tom Marino did. So we're looking for a person among the Republican candidates who can defeat Matthew Cartwright and be that person who will work with the king in this Pennsylvania 8th District, which just by God's plan happens to be at the center of the province right now. And we'll go into the third candidate, Joe Peters, in a minute, but I promised to do our REMA at 6 o'clock, and it's 6:15 now, so I want to go ahead and do that, and we'll go into the third candidate, Joe Peters, after that. By the way, Robert Conagle is a website. They were giving another website on the show just now, but it's rjkforpa.com, rjkforpa.com, if you want to look at him. I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 this morning, and 8, this is where Paul, this is a rather familiar verse, but God leads me to it again this morning. let's start with verse 7, chapter 7, verse 7. For I would that all men were even as myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner, and another after that. I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. So Paul was expecting Jesus to return at any time. You know, this was in the early church, apparently in the time of Paul as well, because Paul actually experienced the resurrected Jesus. He was, on that road to Damascus, and Jesus, where he was, going to Damascus to do more persecution of Christians, and Jesus appeared to him and told him to get with the program. Basically, that's not the literal Hebrew translation, or the Greek translation, but that's basically what Jesus said. And so Paul repented and did that, and so he had this understanding that Jesus could return at any time. He could return any time, and so he was encouraging people: if you're not married, remain unmarried, because Jesus is going to come back and he's going to marry us all. So Paul understood something about the lineage of God, although he doesn't really bring that up so much in his letters. But he understood that, and he understood that it was important for us to save ourselves for the coming Messiah. But he said, but if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. So rather than, if you're going to commit adultery, then go ahead and marry. If you can't wait for Jesus, go ahead and marry. And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. Let not the wife depart from her husband, and if she depart, let her remain unmarried and be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away his wife. So don't divorce. He was saying, if you're married, don't divorce. And even if you do, somehow get into a situation where you leave your husband, or then remain unmarried. So leave open the possibility that your husband can come back to you. And also let not the husband put away his wife. So also the husbands, don't divorce your wives. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. So even if your wife does not believe, in other words, even if she's not following the Christian faith, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. But if she's okay with the idea of living with you, of remaining married to you, then don't divorce her just over the issue of faith. And the woman which hath a husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. So also he's saying, don't divorce. Don't divorce. Continue to try and do your best to convert your husband, convert your wife to become a Christian. All right. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. So, yeah, that's important, isn't it? The unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. We have many cases like this in our faith community, especially because the leadership in Korea. Just some of the couples that we have that were formed by the Korean leadership have been disasters. Because basically they put out the word, in Korea that hey, if you're poor and you're a farmer and no self-respecting Korean woman will marry you, don't worry, you can come to us and we'll give you a woman from Thailand or Philippines, and you'll have a wife. And so we have quite a few situations now, not just Thai and Philippines, but also Japanese wives who are in very, very, very inhumane situations. Their husbands are violent, they drink, and they sexually abuse their families, not just their wives. But these women, for the most part, have continue to persevere in trying to do whatever they can to convert their husbands. Really, many of the stories are beyond belief. But then Paul says, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. Yes, so Paul on how to handle those kinds of situations. Let's move quickly to the Cheonseongyong. I'm in the book on the restoration of God's true homeland, chapter 1, and at the very beginning of that chapter, Jesus came to establish the homeland of the true God. This is an important sentence right there, that if Jesus had been understood in his time, he would have done then what Father has done in the 20th and 21st centuries. These things Jesus would have done in the first century. His job, his mission was to establish God's homeland, to establish God's ideal world, the ideal society that God envisioned at the beginning. This was, of course, Adam's job. When he failed, it became the job of the second Adam, Jesus. And then when Jesus was crucified, dead, buried, and resurrected, promising to come again, it became the job of the third Adam, of true Father. The prophets and patriots of history worked to build this same homeland. In order to establish heaven, one perfect man must come. In order to establish this heaven, what, who, what, where? One perfect what? One perfect what? One perfect man. One perfect man must come, because it's the man who carries the seed. That's why it has to be a man. This man must be recognized by heaven and earth, begin a family, have children, and then establish a tribe, people, and a nation. He must indemnify the relationship between Cain and Abel, engraft them to himself, and build the homeland of God's dominion in this world. So he must indemnify the relationship between Cain and Abel. This is why the ceremony that Father held on June 5th of 2012 was so important. Just about exactly 3 months prior to his passing, prior to his Songhwa, Father in Las Vegas held a ceremony where he prayed himself, Han Mother, the king, Hyung and Kuk, and there he, in that prayer, declared that this was the true Cain and true Abel who had victory in the Cain-Abel relationship in the true family for the first time. And there he established that victory of Cain and Abel in the true family. And it was based on that victory that he was able to say, okay, now I can go to the spirit world, because even if the Han Mother deceives, still Cain and Abel will be there, and they will be able to carry on the providence. And that is exactly what has happened. The prophets and patriots of history desired this result. However, they were unable to build the longed-for kingdom of heaven on earth, to which individuals, families, tribes, peoples, nations, and the world could be connected. Therefore, we must abandon the path along which humankind has been heading and go in God's direction. So they were unable to build the longed-for kingdom of heaven on earth, to which individuals, families, tribes, peoples, nations, and the world could be connected. So the idea is to build the kingdom of heaven on earth, and then everybody else connects to that. See, and this is how the Cheonryuk Constitution is designed, to have a nation, and then other nations can join it and become the United States of Cheonryuk. Elsewhere in the Cheonseongyong, Father talks about a foundational nation, or a form. Anyway, he talks about in terms of there being one nation, starting small, and then other nations and other people and other tribes connecting to that. And that is the United States of Cheonryuk, and that is exactly how the Constitution of Cheonryuk has been designed. Please take a look at that. And by the way, someone was asking, what about leaving the United States of Cheonryuk? What does the Constitution say about that? Well, it says nothing. And guess what? Go to Principle 2, right number 10. And when it says that when the Constitution says nothing about something, well, that means that right, that authority belongs to the several states and the people. So the fact that it says nothing about leaving means that states can leave whenever they choose. That's what the Constitution says in Principle 2, right number 10. Okay, and that, by the way, is anyway. Okay, we don't have to go into all that. But anyway, let's go now to the third candidate. So to review, in the videos that you just saw, the first two candidates you saw in the little subtitles there at the bottom, you saw that they were running in the 17th Congressional District in Pennsylvania. That was under the old system, under the old district map. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has decreed unconstitutionally, and yet, well, we still have to live with it. Even though it is wrong, it is still, we have to live with this dictatorial action by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They have redrawn the district map, and so that Cheonryung is no longer in the 10th Pennsylvania district. It is in the 8th district, and these gentlemen are no longer running in the 17th district. They are also running in the 8th district. Right now in the 8th district, now we have an incumbent, Matthew Cartwright, who is very liberal, who is a liberal with not just capital L, but all capital liberal, very strong supporter of Hillary Clinton, and Gun Owners of America gives him a 10% rating, and Planned Parenthood and other liberal organizations give him very high rating, and so we need a Republican who can defeat him in November, because whoever wins the congressional seat for the 8th district is going to be working with the king on various matters, connecting the micro and the macro. And so it's very important that we have someone who can work with the king. So, and then on May 15th, we need to go to the polls and cast our vote for someone who can do that. And by the way, in order to do that, in order to vote on May 15th, you have to be registered in the 8th district, and that has to happen before April 16th. Has to happen before April 16th. So if you're not registered, please do that. And if you've moved since you last registered, since the last 2 years, since President Trump was elected, if you've moved in the meantime, you need to register again at your new address. Otherwise, you will not be able to vote in your own neighborhood. You'll have to go to your previous neighborhood, but that's actually also not the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to re-register at your new address so that you vote in your own neighborhood, in your own precinct, as they call it in elections. All right, let's go now to Joe Peters. Now, Joe Peters is the gentleman who appeared on the King's Report yesterday, Frank Scavone, is it? Predicted that Joe Peters has the best chance of winning this primary. So let's take a look at who he is. Here, his website is joepeters.com, and he describes himself as a counterterrorism expert. He plays up the fact that he worked in the office of the drug czar, that is the White House office. He was the number 2 man under 2 presidents in the office of the drug czar. He is a federal prosecutor who went up against the mafia in Philadelphia and won. He put in prison some important mafia figures down there. So he is a very strong law and order person. He has strong feelings about the opioid crisis. Here in his website, he says he rose from a street cop to serving 2 presidents as a leader in the efforts to combat drug trafficking and battle international terrorism. As a federal prosecutor, Joe's accomplishments include the convictions of Philadelphia mob boss Little Nicky Scarfo, his underboss, and 16 mob soldiers in a 3-month trial before an anonymous and sequestered jury. Conducted by Joe and 4 other federal prosecutors, this trial resulted in one of the most significant mafia family convictions in U.S. history. So if you're a mafioso, I guess you're not going to vote for this guy. But let's continue here. As a result, Joe received the U.S. Department of Justice's John Marshall Award. The Associated Press calls Joe and his fellow prosecutors the modern-day untouchables. Joe has presented and consulted to law enforcement officials in Israel, Italy, the UK, Dubai, Kuwait, and Qatar, and has trained military and civilian personnel in Panama. A native of Scranton, Joe has devoted his career to public service. He served for more than 15 years in the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General, rising from an intern to become the state's top prosecutor. In the White House, he served as Assistant Deputy Director for State and Local Affairs in the Drug Czar's office. Joe's expertise on terrorism and related intelligence and prosecution issues has been recognized by Fox News, CNN, and television networks as far away as London and Italy, which have asked for his expert on-air commentary. Joe is pro-life and a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. In the past, he has been A-rated by the NRA. He graduated from King's College and later the Dickinson School of Law. He is a member of the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, where he sits on its terrorism committee. Joe is the oldest of 5 children of Gene and Peg Peters and is the proud father of his son Max. His father Gene served 2 terms as a GOP mayor of Scranton. So his father was a former mayor of Scranton. In 2004, Joe was the Republican nominee for Pennsylvania Auditor General. So he has experience running, and I guess he did not win that election. His father was a politician. His experience has been in law enforcement, especially fighting drugs, fighting the mafia. He's been a police officer, and he is recognized as a terrorism expert. Now, I could not find a interview with Joe Peters that had on the Lasante show. And that may be because he was originally running not in the 17th district, but in another district. But now he's also in the 8th district. And so I do have an interview where he was interviewed on a radio. And so let's listen to that interview now.
Joe Peters is our guest. He announced yesterday that he is running for Congress in the 11th Congressional District. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Sue. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am very well. I think a little bit better than you, so get well quickly, please.
I'm doing my darndest. Now, when you announced yesterday, you did it using a video presentation that talked about your career, the things that
let's go to the tab Meet Joe
in your life that actually would make you tailor.
Or actually the front page. Click on the left title.
Well,
that's good. Yeah. Okay.
Voters need to know whom they are electing and why. What are the issues? Does the candidate sort of match in terms of experience the issues of the day? And I think you mentioned in the last half hour that I really took a deliberate time to travel through the district because I didn't want to be one of those people saying, well, it's an open seat. I want to be the next congressman to succeed Lou Barletta. I wanted to know that I could make a difference. And as I traveled around, I kept hearing the same issues over and over. And first among them was the heroin opioid crisis. And when I heard that and when I thought about my background as a former street cop and the chief of narcotics for the state and the federal mafia prosecutor, because the mob is so involved in the drug issue, and then having had the honor of working for 2 presidents in the White House in a senior position in the drug czar's office, I thought I can help fix this. I can help every parent out there, every person who opens up the newspaper, and sadly we see almost daily the photo of a young person, and whether it says it or not, and there are many brave souls and families who talk about what happened to their child, their teenager. We all know what the reason is behind that. So as I heard about this issue and I looked at my background, to answer your question, I thought maybe the best way to do this, to make my appeal to the voters who will hire me, I'll never forget that I work for the voters and it's not the other way around. I thought, why not talk about the issues of the day about which I have been hearing and why my background is suited to really deal with those in an aggressive and thoughtful way.
Okay. Let's talk about the opioid issue because, Joe, I bet there are people listening today, whether they be parents or spouses or brothers and sisters, who say, we can't wait any longer for a solution. This crisis is pressing us right now. What can you offer right now for the people? What are your suggestions?
Well, right now it's a matter of being aggressive and fighting this battle on all fronts. This battle touches every person. There's no economic, there's no ethnic, there's no rural, urban dimension to this. And the way to deal with it is to collectively reach out and coerce, if necessary, every piece of this that can help fix it. And by that I mean people look to me as a cop and prosecutor. Law enforcement's important, especially to the drug trafficking gangs and the Mexican cartels and those in Southeast Asia. But it's not just about law enforcement. As importantly, probably more importantly now, is education. And we hear education and we think, okay, it's some class in the 5th grade. DARE is great, but it's much more than that. It's a parent educating their child at home that just because you see a prescription in the medicine cabinet, it doesn't mean that that's okay for you to take. So parents can be soldiers in this battle as much as the police by getting rid of those opioids that are sitting around in the medicine cabinet. It's dealing with insurance companies, making the case that addiction is just as much a disease as cancer or any other disease. And we need not only treatment, but long-term inpatient treatment care if we're going to deal with addiction and help people through recovery. It's engaging with physicians and physicians' assistants and pharmacists and nurses, because sadly, when I was a street cop, nobody wanted to be a heroin addict because there was that notion of a person in the alley with a needle in their arm. That was the problem then, and that in itself, that picture, kept people away. Now, the problem is on its head, and the delivery mechanism to heroin and fentanyl and opioid addiction, ironically, has been that prescription. The young wrestler who gets injured and is given too many oxycodones, or the woman, the senior citizen who has a tooth problem, and for pain they're given Percocets. And what happens is, unless those pills are controlled and unless the doctor is thoughtful and says, instead of 20 in a bottle, I'm going to give you 4 and call me in 2 days and we'll see if you need any more. Because what happens is that addiction is strong and it grips you quickly. The pills run out. Then you're doctor shopping, or you're buying pills on the street for $50 at a pop. That doesn't last long. And then what happens? Your addiction delivers you to the $10 bag of heroin on the street in Hazleton or Wilkes-Barre or Scranton or anywhere else. So we need to work on all fronts, bring everybody together, be aggressive. We can't fool around with this anymore. We can't just talk about it.
Okay. And I know that the fentanyl is a real issue, and it seems to be something that is, I would believe, coming into the United States illegally. All this fentanyl on the streets, Joe, this can't possibly be from the pharmaceutical industry, right?
Fentanyl is the killer, and it's not coming from the pharmaceutical industry. You know, we need to keep the pressure on the doctors and the pharma companies to control. Nobody wants to deny people pain medication, but let's control it and monitor it so people don't get addicted. When you're talking fentanyl, you're talking about it coming in from overseas through the mail. You're talking about it coming in from Mexico. And fentanyl now is the killer within that packet of heroin because it is so much more addictive than the heroin itself. And people don't know it's in there. They don't know in what amounts. It's cheap to get. The drug dealers, the punks, cut fentanyl into heroin so they can expand the quantity. And then there's carfentanil, which a lot of people don't even know about. It's actually an elephant tranquilizer, which comes in from China virtually unmonitored. And police can't even, in a search, touch that because a couple of grains on your skin can cause you potentially death or a serious health problem and maybe even a road to addiction. So it's that bad.
Now, you did mention that a lot of this activity does come to the United States through illegal means. How do you feel about Donald Trump and the border wall? Because that issue is hot and cold. It's on and off. I understand it might come flying back up shortly, and there might be sort of dealing going on about that. Do we need a border wall?
We do. And you can define that in a couple of different ways. When I worked in the White House as a deputy drug czar, one of my responsibilities was the southwest border, that 2,000 miles a border which transits 4 states, from California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And it is wide open in so many places. And not only is it sort of key to the drug problem and the flow of drugs into the country, but it intersects every other problem. Guns going back and forth, human trafficking, terrorism. People can walk across that border, and we see, in my work in counterterrorism around the world, we see a concerted effort on the part of terrorist organizations, whether they be Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any number, to send people to Mexico and to Canada, but it's much tougher to get in through Canada, but to go to Mexico and just walk across that border in the midst of everyone else. So controlling that border wall, and whether wall means an actual wall, whether it means geography that is so severe that you can't cross, whether it means a combination of smart technologies with sensor and some classified things that we do in the air and camera surveillance, we definitely need a wall.
There's been a lot of issues across the country, Joe, about legalizing marijuana either medicinally or recreationally, or in some cases both. And then we have an Attorney General of the United States who recently threw up some roadblocks to marijuana legalization. As somebody who has worked on the streets and as a prosecutor and knows a thing or two about drugs, how do you see the issue of marijuana as both possible medicine and recreational marijuana?
So I tried to come at this in a deliberate way, and as you said, sort of taking all of my experience, what I saw on the street, and all the way up to the White House dealing with drug policy. And I'll say this at the outset, I have never been a proponent of recreational, flat-out legalization of marijuana. It would be the road to disaster to countries that have tried that for years now. We can look back and see the problems they have, where they have entire cities and societies, where there's a malaise, where they have crime problems, health problems. It goes on and on. Having said that, if marijuana is medicine and truly legitimate medicine, then I'm in favor of anybody getting the medicine that they need to help their condition. The problem always has been the efficacy of marijuana as medicine, of THC and the other cannabinoids in marijuana. We don't go to the ballot box to vote for our heart medication. So why would we do that when it comes to marijuana? So I guess what I'm saying is, if we can establish that in certain cases marijuana is legitimate medicine and the best medicine, then we should use it that way. It should go through the FDA like every other pharmaceutical that we have. There are ways to do experimental drugs to shortcut that process, and that's okay. But we need medical oversight, and we need marijuana as medicine only.
Joe Peters, how do you see the issue of health care in America? Because I'm sure that will not be something that goes away quietly. There's been so much rancor from both sides, as some who believe Obamacare has been extremely helpful to people, and others who believe it has driven up costs and has led to lower quality health care for some individuals within their own plan. So how do you see that? And also the expense, of course.
On the upside, Obamacare, I guess, has provided some people with health care that didn't have it before. But when you look at the panoply of the impact, I think it's clear, if you look at the data and even in public opinion polls, that Obamacare really hasn't been the answer, and there are some real problems with it. And, as a conservative Republican, I don't like the government telling me to do anything. There's a place for government, but it's a minimalist view that I have. And so for things like the mandate where I'm told to get health care or a certain kind of health care. I don't think that's a good thing. So I would be looking to repeal and replace Obamacare, not to deny people coverage, but to come up with ways where it's more meaningful and it can help everyone get the health care that they require. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about issues of health care and lower taxes and Second Amendment, and, you know, and I've gotten an A rating from the NRA because I truly believe in our individual liberties. But all of these things don't really matter unless we can live in a safe and secure society. And, you know, we talked about the heroin opioid crisis. That is first among the issues, but there's also the homegrown terrorism problem. And we look at things like a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, or people in Times Square being run over with a vehicle, or a bomb in a stadium in Las Vegas. That stadium could be at any high school stadium in any one of the 9 counties in this district or anywhere across Pennsylvania, rural, urban, it doesn't matter. So, you know, that was another thing that came up when people talked about the problems and my background, that whole notion of dealing with domestic, homegrown, violent extremists, terrorists that are driven ideologically on the internet. With a few bucks, you can rent a car, you can buy a pressure cooker. It is easy, and we need to work with every religion, every community organization. We see something, say something. We need to work with parents who could, in turn, work with their children. So many of these problems we have, whether it's the heroin opioid problem, whether it's homegrown violent extremists, whether it's people who twist their minds into wanting to assassinate a police officer, so much of that starts in the home with parents and their children.
Joe Peters, running for U.S. Congress in the 11th District. Thank you so much for introducing yourself to people who don't know you and letting us know about your platform. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
So people can go to joepeters.com, see the video you mentioned, and I really appreciate your time and that of your listeners this morning. Thanks so much.
Okay, so that was Joe Peters running for Congress in the 8th Congressional District, not the 11th. That was the 11th was where he was running prior to this redistricting, unilateral redistricting by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So now he's running in the 8th and not the 11th Congressional District. So we've heard from all 3 candidates who are running for Congress in the 8th District. And as I said, we have an incumbent now, Matthew Cartwright, who is a very liberal person. And so any one of these 3 people that we've heard from would be far better than he, far better than Matthew Cartwright. So which one is going to go up against him in November? That decision will be made by Republican voters on May 15th in the Pennsylvania primary. And to vote in that primary, you have to register as a Republican on or before April 16th. April 16th is the deadline for doing that. And so the first priority, obviously, is who can defeat Matthew Cartwright, who is most likely to be able to defeat Matthew Cartwright, and then also who will be the best person to work as a partner with the second king of Cheongguk. Who would be most likely to resonate, I guess you could say, or to connect artistically on a artistic level, on a providential level with the second king of Cheongguk in a way that Tom Marino has over the past few years. Tom Marino is a good man. He's running in another district, and according to RasmussenReports.com, his new district is safe Republican, so most likely he will continue in Congress. That same RasmussenReports.com lists this 8th district now as leaning Democrat, or yes, and so according to Political.com, the re-election rate of members of the House of Representatives overall tends to be around 90%. In other words, if a member of the House of Representatives chooses to run for re-election, his chance of success is about 90%. Now, many members will look at the situation, and if they think, well, maybe this time I'm not going to win, they will retire, or they will run for another office. They'll run for the Senate. They'll run for governor or something like that. But if they choose to run again for re-election, 90% of the time they win. This is the historical data. So Matthew Cartwright starts out with a huge advantage. That's the advantage of the incumbency, by the way. So, you know, an incumbent can go to his people and say, look, I've given you free stuff here, I've given you free stuff there, so re-elect me. And 90% of the time they do. So going up against an incumbent is a hugely difficult task. So whoever wins the May 15th, the Republican primary, is going to need a lot of help from those of us who want someone who can, at least on some level, work with the second king of Cheongguk in the 8th Pennsylvania district. Maybe I'll give you some of my initial impressions of the three men as to who would be best to support for the May 15th primary. I think process of elimination first of all. I think we can take out Robert Knugal. He does not impress me. He has some good opinions, but I think when you're choosing a candidate to support in an election, it's not a matter of making a checklist of all the positions. You know, Second Amendment, pro-life, health, education, and then checking off, and then you support the guy that agrees on more issues than the others. I don't think that's the way to do it. Because it's not just a matter of having good opinions. It's a matter of being able to go to a body like the House of Representatives and build a coalition to convince other people, to convince other congressmen to support your position. And Robert Knugal does not impress me as someone who can do that. He likes Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, that's good. Teddy Roosevelt was a good guy. He has some opinion. He has some proposals, but I'm not impressed with his ability to get things done in a body like the House of Representatives. So I think that I would, in deciding who to support for the May 15th primary, I think I would start with eliminating Robert Knugal. Then between John Trin and Joe Peters, until last night, I was thinking it would be Joe Peters. But watching the interviews and watching John Trin's interview and listening to Joe Peters' interview this morning, I'm leaning now more towards John Trin. Joe Peters plays up the issue of the opioid crisis, and this is certainly a tremendous crisis everywhere in America. And rural Pennsylvania, northeast Pennsylvania is not an exception. And I like that Joe Peters approaches the drug addiction issue not just in terms of law enforcement, but also in terms of education, in terms of educating the parents or people, saying that just because you have a pain medication in your medicine cabinet doesn't necessarily mean that you should take it. And also he talked about educating the insurance companies and things like that. I like that he goes beyond the law enforcement aspect. He's had success as a federal prosecutor. He prosecuted the leader of the Philadelphia Mafia and some of his subordinates and put a lot of them in jail. That's fine. That's great. Good. Mafia belongs in jail. But John Trin is a pretty attractive guy, isn't he? John Trin is a pretty attractive guy, not just physically, externally, but also in terms of his sort of positive spirit. I feel a very strong positive spirit from John Trin that I don't feel from Joe Peters. Right now, I think I'm leaning a bit towards John Trin. But, I think we all have to pray about this, and perhaps at some point the second king may give us some indication of his preference. I don't know, but it's good that we have some very good people running in the Republican primary, and let's hope that the person who wins is the person who can, first of all, defeat Matt Cartwright and can work with the second king over the next 2 years. Okay, then we also have some other important elections this November. Bob Casey, a Democratic senator, is running for re-election, and he's being opposed by he will be opposed by a Republican, and the Republicans are having a primary to decide who will go up against Bob Casey, and that primary is also occurring on May 15th. And then also we have the governor's race, where Tom Wolf, the very socialist Democratic governor, is running for re-election, and we have some Republicans who are going up against him. Also, that will also be an issue in the May 15th Republican primary. So we'll be looking at those in future Saturdays. I hope that you will tune in then, and I will do a little bit of research and try to give you an idea of who is running, and so that we can make a decision. Each of us can make our own decision on who to support at the May 15th primary. But it's important, though, that we register to vote. And if you're listening to this outside Pennsylvania, outside of the 8th District, please pray for the people who are running in this district and who are running in Pennsylvania, because these are the people who need to work with the second king, who need to connect on the macro and micro level with the second king. So please pray that God's will can be done through these elections, so that we can have good people supporting the second king in the providence here. All right, let's take a break, and then we'll come back at 7 o'clock in 5 minutes from now with more news from a Chonya Group perspective.
Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve? On their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. Just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated. Every child has a dream to belong and be loved. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love, when we
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 24th, 2018. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Moon. We've been going through some of the candidates for the Congress in the Pennsylvania 8th District this morning, and we listened to three interviews, one by each of the candidates. Now let's go to other news going on. Sacramento sees more protests after fatal shooting of unarmed black man. These incidents, these police mistakes truly are a cause of concern here. What happened is that here in the final paragraph here, it explains what happened, second to the final paragraph, a candlelight vigil was held to commemorate the death of Clark, who died in a hail of police gunshots Sunday night. Apparently 20 times he was shot. In the darkened backyard of the home where he had been staying with his grandparents, police say they thought he was pointing a handgun, but they found only a cell phone nearby. So this is another situation where the police shot a man who was unarmed, and I don't think he was. I don't know if he was the person they were looking for or not. But protests have been going on. Black Lives Matter has been involved in this. They're taking advantage of this to spread their ideology. This is definitely a tragic situation. The kind of thing that you have to think about. Okay, how is this going to proceed under the Cheongguk Constitution? Under the Cheongguk Constitution, we do not have a police force that is paid by the central government, and our communities are policed by members of the community, by the neighbors, who receive training, and their advantage will be that they will know the neighborhood, they will know the people in the neighborhood. So I think it's far less likely that this kind of situation will occur. Let's look at these protests. Protests continued in Sacramento, California on Friday following Sunday's fatal police shooting of a 22-year-old Stephen, you pronounce it Stephen or Stephen Clark. Around 3 p.m., California Highway Patrol officers prevented protesters from entering Interstate 5. One day earlier, demonstrators shut down I-5 during the afternoon commute and delayed the start of a pro basketball game at the city's downtown sports arena. Though no violence occurred, tensions remained high between protesters and police as crowds moved from Tower Bridge, then to the state capitol, and ultimately to the streets of downtown Sacramento, a route of about 4 miles, Fox 40 reported. The protesters shouted slogans like "Whose streets? Our streets," and "No justice, no peace." Some reportedly climbed atop and pounded on parked patrol vehicles, while others tried to prevent tensions from escalating. At least one protester was arrested for allegedly breaking a window on a commuter bus, Fox 40 reported. Now, the second king and everyone around him very much in support of law enforcement. At the same time, I'm sure members of the police and law enforcement want to prevent this kind of situation. I want to create a situation where we don't have this kind of thing happening. But the unfortunate fact is that this has happened all too often. It puts a wedge between the police and members of the community. And something long-term has to be done about it. Something fundamental needs to be fixed. I believe that the Chenyu Constitution does offer a fundamental fix to this kind of situation, as I've explained. Right, let's look at other articles on Fox News this morning. President Trump issues order to ban transgender troops from service except in limited circumstances. Let's see what those limited circumstances might be. President Donald Trump on Friday officially authorized the ability of the Pentagon to ban transgender individuals from joining the military, with limited exceptions, following through on a pledge he made last year. Among other things, the policies set forth by the Secretary of Defense state that transgender persons with a history of diagnosis of gender dysphoria, individuals who the policies state may require substantial medical treatment, including medications and surgery, are disqualified from military service except under certain limited circumstances, a memo released by the White House on Friday night said. Major David Eastburn, a Pentagon spokesman, said the announcement of a new policy would have no immediate practical effect on the military because the Pentagon is obliged to continue to recruit and retrain transgender people in accordance with current law. So what? So the president said don't, but current law says do. Okay. The Department of Justice issued a statement defending the Pentagon after consultation. Trump says that after consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender and military would entail. Thank you. This was last July 26th, that he made those 3 tweets. And then the Justice Department says, after comprehensive study and analysis, the Secretary of Defense concluded the new policies should be adopted regarding individuals with gender dysphoria that are consistent with military effectiveness and lethality, budgetary constraints, and applicable law. The statement reads, the Department of Justice will continue to defend DoD's lawful authority to create and implement personnel policies they have determined are necessary to best defend our nation. Consistent with this new policy, we're asking the courts to lift all related preliminary injunctions in order to ensure the safety and security of the American people and the best fighting force in the world. But criticism came quickly from LGBT advocates and from the leadership of the Democratic Party. The Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBT civil rights organization, accused the Trump administration of pushing anti-gender prejudices onto the military. And there is simply no way to spin it. The Trump-Pence administration is going all in on its discriminatory, unconstitutional, and despicable ban on transgender troops, said HRC President Chad Griffin. No one with the strength and bravery to serve in the U.S. military should be turned away because of who they are. This hateful ban is purpose-built to humiliate our brave transgender members of the military who serve with honor and dignity. The Democratic National Committee released a statement signed by the chairman Tom Perez, DNC LGBT Caucus Chair Earl Folks, and DNC Treasurer Bill DeRoe, whom the DNC says was prevented from serving in the military because he is openly gay. Okay. And Pelosi also chimed in. Then Mattis, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, in February sent Trump a memorandum laying out policies that, in the exercise of his independent judgment, should be implemented by the Defense Department. The memo reads in part, based on the work of the panel and the Department's best military judgment, the Department of Defense concludes that there are substantial risks associated with allowing the accession and retention of individuals with a history of diagnosis of gender dysphoria and require or have required already undertaken a course of treatment to change their gender. Furthermore, the department also finds that exempting such persons from well-established mental health, physical health, and sex-based standards which apply to all service members, including transgender service members without gender dysphoria, could undermine readiness, disrupt unit cohesion, and impose an unreasonable burden of the military that is most conducive to military effectiveness and lethality. Okay. We'll have to. I guess we have to wait and see what kind of long-term effect that's going to have, actual effect, and we hope that it does lead to a military with greater lethality. They say greater lethality means a better ability to kill people, and which is a good thing. That's what you need in the military. That's what the military is for. Greater lethality. All right. Died for his country. Hero French cop swapped cell for hostages during Friday terror attack. This was a terror attack that occurred in southern France. The King briefly mentioned it yesterday morning during the King's report, but there was a terror incident where in France, close to the Spanish border, where people say they were inspired by ISIS, and ISIS also claimed the responsibility for the incident. Anyway, they took hostages in a supermarket, and this police officer swapped himself for the hostages so that the terrorists let the hostages go and took him instead. And as a result of this, he eventually lost his life. Now, that's the kind of police officer that really lives up to the profession. Not the kind of guy like Scott Peterson who sat outside the high school in Parkland, Florida, while kids were being shot and killed inside. But this man, this French man, who, as a police officer, exchanged himself for hostages who were being held, and then that took a lot of bravery to do that, and it cost him his life. Wow, that is a man worth remembering. That is a man worth being our model. Mexico death mystery: family of 4 vanishes. 4 found dead in a tourist complex condo. Mexico seems like the kind of place that we shouldn't be in such of a hurry to visit right now. I don't know what their rate of murder seems to be going up quite a bit. A family of 4 from Iowa who went missing after traveling to Mexico was found dead Thursday night in their condominium in a tourist complex in the country, police confirmed to Fox News. The family, Kevin Wayne Sharp, 41, and Amy Marie Sharp, 38, Sterling Wayne Sharp, 12, and Adriana Maria Sharp, 7, left their hometown of Creston, Iowa, to travel to Tulum, Mexico on March 15th, the Des Moines Register reported. Grieving relatives and friends of the family gathered Friday at the home of Beth Fry, mother of Amy Sharp. The newspaper reported, "Life is not going to be the same without her." Fry told the newspaper, "Half my family is gone." Chief Paul Vermeer of the Creston Police Department told Fox News the family was found dead Thursday night in a condo they rented in Tulum. The family's cause of death was not immediately known, but the department was awaiting autopsy reports. There appears to be no signs of trauma. Okay, so that means they were not shot. Not okay. So there were no signs of trauma. Means that there was no bullet holes or knife wounds or strangulation marks or anything like that. You have to wonder then: was it a gas thing? Was it asphyxiation? Maybe carbon monoxide? Ashley Peterson, a family member, wrote in a Facebook post that the family was supposed to return to the U.S. on Wednesday after catching a flight from Cancun, but did not return. Peterson said the Sharps notified family members that they made it to Mexico safely, but that was the last time they heard from them. Peterson said the family filed a missing persons report via the U.S. Embassy in Mexico. They also tried to locate their family by tracing their cell phones, but found there was no movement on their phones. The family's social media accounts were also at a standstill. Renee Hoyt, Amy Sharp's sister, told a Creston News advertiser that the family flew into Cancun and rented a car to drive to Tulum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so, one thing that when you're traveling overseas, for American citizens, and I imagine for most other countries as well, you can register with the local embassy or a local consulate. And it's a good idea to do that so that in an emergency, the embassy knows where to look for you and knows where you're supposed to be or where to expect you. I did that when I was living in Korea. Just, registering and just letting them know, here, I'm an American citizen and this is my address and this is my phone number. And, if there's an emergency that happens, this is how you can contact me. It's, sharing information with the government and all that. But when you're in a foreign country, it's a good thing. When you're in a foreign country, you're basically... especially if you're in a country where you don't speak the language or don't speak the language fluently or at a native level, you're at a disadvantage. And in terms of your own personal safety, it's more difficult to ensure your safety. Even in countries or even in Pennsylvania where, we have strong Second Amendment rights, still foreigners here are not allowed to carry guns and in many other countries, and not just guns, but even knives. In Japan, I once read a story about an American man who got lost in Tokyo. He came across a small, police box, a small police station. And so he went in to ask directions, and they asked him to empty his pockets. And he did that, and he had a small pocket knife, the kind of that, people routinely carry in America. But this was illegal in Japan, and so he was arrested. He was arrested in Japan. So this is the kind of, disadvantage that you're in when you're in a foreign country, in any foreign country. I've lived more than half of my life, about 2/3 of my life in foreign countries. And so I'm had many occasions where I became painfully aware of this fact. So I think it is important to do whatever you can to ensure your safety. And one of the ways that you can do that, when it's a small way but an important way, I think, is to register yourself with the local embassy, U.S. embassy or consulate general, the nearest one, so that they will know how to reach you in a case of emergency. Very tragic a situation that this Iowa family experienced. Let's see what else. We had some other stories on the Fox News that I wanted to cover this morning. And I also have a tab open for a president's Twitter account so that we'll get his tweets when he starts. Sometimes he starts about about 6 o'clock or so. Maybe this morning he's getting up a little bit late. Maybe he's wrestling over what he did yesterday. Okay. Officer kills driver who pinned him against a gas pump. Police say a man retrieving baseballs gets stuck between two buildings. And here's what you need to know about today's March for Our Lives gun control rally. Okay, let's see what we need to know about today's rally in Washington, D.C., originally planned by the Parkland, Florida high school students, but co-opted now completely by the adult-led anti-gun organizations. Let's see March. Let's see what the Fox News thinks we ought to know. Just days after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, which killed 17 people, students turned activists echoed the words "never again" and "not one more," pushing lawmakers for increased gun control and better school safety. You see, those things don't go hand in hand, increased gun control and better school safety. But anyway, let's see what happens here. Many of the Parkland students who have primarily taken to social media to champion these issues have met with President Trump and Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, among others, to demand action. One shooter survivor, Cameron Caskey, a junior at the high school, wrote an op-ed about his experience, demanding Congress to take action. Other Parkland shooting survivors have organized events, in addition to the 17-minute National School Walkout on March 14th, which honored those killed in the massacre and protested gun violence. Student activists are planning a march in Washington, D.C. called a March for Our Lives. And that's the event that is taking place today in Washington, D.C. Ahead of the event, here's what you need to know. When is March for Our Lives? The march is slated to take place on Saturday, March 24th, around 12 p.m., organizers said. Where is it? The primary march will take place in Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue between 3rd and 12th Street Northwest, according to the March for Our Lives website. And by the way, in Milford, Pennsylvania today, there will be a counter demonstration or a pro-gun demonstration, a Gun Saves Lives demonstration. Gun Saves Lives demonstration will be held today at 12 o'clock in front of the Pike County Courthouse in Milford, Pennsylvania. So if you're in the area, you can attend that. Initially, organizers wanted to hold the event on the National Mall, but were forced to choose another location because their request conflicted with a film crew's permit, the Washington Post reported. Many other cities, such as Portland, Oregon, Boise, Idaho, Philadelphia, New York City, San Francisco, Dallas, and Chicago, among hundreds of other places, are holding sister marches. To see if your city is holding a march, you can check here. They have a link there. Why are the marches being organized? This is such a unifying experience. It's truly nonpartisan, said Ellie Bowen, 19, a freshman at the University of South Carolina. She plans to attend a sister march in Columbia on March 24th. Not everyone necessarily agrees how gun reform should happen, but different viewpoints are coming together and all agree that no American child should feel unsafe in school. Well, that's certainly true. No American child should feel unsafe in school. So let's repeal the 1990 law that established gun-free zones around schools. That law, that 1990 law, made children unsafe. Law proposed by then-Senator Joe Biden and signed into law by H.W. Bush. All right? So how about holding up a sign, repeal whatever the official name of that law is. It's a 1990 law that established gun-free zones around schools, and was a bad idea. We can see that now after 28 years. It was a bad idea. For Bowen, who has been working with local high schools and student organizations on her campus to help organize the event, the shooting itself doesn't get any more close to home. Bowen is originally from Parkland, Florida, while she didn't attend Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, her older brother did. On top of that, her parents' home is just 5 minutes away from the school where the Valentine's Day mass shooting unfolded. I was on the phone with my mom during the shooting, she said, adding that the helicopters heading toward the high school could be heard in the call's background. Parkland was the last place in America I ever expected for this to happen, she said. That's why we need to be prepared everywhere, I was talking on the telephone with one guy who called to protest our February 28th blessing. And he was telling me, this guy was telling me that I was never going to be attacked. He asked me why I wanted an AR-15, and I told him, well, and I said for self-defense, and he said, self-defense against whom? And I said, well, someone coming at me with an AR-15. And he told me, you are never going to be attacked by anyone with an AR-15. This is what he told me. And so I said, wow, you know, I've got God on the phone. I mean, who else can say that, right? That I, Tim Elder, will never be attacked by an AR-15. Who else can say that but God? So I have God on the phone. That's a stupid thing to say. That is a stupid thing for a human being to say, unless you are God. Because like this woman said, Parkland was the last place in America I ever expected for this to happen. She said, well, maybe I'm the last person that anyone would expect to be attacked by an AR-15. But guess what? I need to be prepared because these things happen in the last places that you would ever expect to the last person that you would ever expect. This is why everyone needs to be pre-prepared. And this is why everyone needs to have the opportunity to have the tools to defend themselves. Everyone needs to have the ability, the opportunity, the legal environment in which they can own an AR-15. Yeah. So the Philadelphia Inquirer did an interview of Kukchinim, and he says that every American should have an AR-15. Okay, maybe above, we don't want to give AR-15s to 3-year-olds, but anyway, every American above a certain age should have an AR-15. And the 3-year-olds will be defended by their parents. All right, with AR-15s. Once known for its picturesque golf courses and safety, Bowen added, the city will now be remembered as the site of one of the biggest mass shootings in U.S. history. Shortly after the suspected shooter, Nicholas Cruz, was identified, Bowen had a chilling realization she knew him, albeit not well. His name sounded familiar, even though I didn't want it to, she said. At that moment, Bowen realized that she and he had attended the same middle school. He even had a presence back then. She said, coming to that realization was the most difficult thing to deal with. Bowen said, I knew someone who was capable to inflict that kind of damage, but Bowen has since channeled her emotions, which have ranged from sadness to fear to anger into activism. I wanted to do something even though I couldn't be there in Parkland, she said. Participating in the march later this month is the most effective way to process what I was going through, she said. She added, students are directly telling legislators what they want to be done. I hope that continues. But I think, the march at the Milford courthouse, the Pike County Courthouse in Milford, Pennsylvania, is going to contribute more to school safety than this march in Washington, D.C. will. Pressuring President Trump to do dumb things like banning bump stocks or raising the age limit. These kinds of things are not going to improve school safety. What was it on Wednesday? We had a situation, Tuesday or Wednesday, we had a situation at a high school in Maryland where a young man, 17 years old, came in with a pistol and wounded 2 people. And unfortunately, during the night, last night, one of the persons that was wounded was taken off life support, and she passed away. She died. But he was 17 years old. He had a pistol that he had stolen from his father, or taken from his father. So background checks didn't stop that shooting. Raising the age limit did not stop that shooting. And if you're going to ban all weapons, even all semi-automatics, which would include semi-automatic pistols, which is almost all weapons, almost all firearms now on the market, you're going to reverse the decline, the huge decline in violent crime that has occurred in the United States over the past 25 years. And coinciding with this decline, almost by half, violent crime has decreased according to FBI statistics. And coinciding with that decline, there's been a huge increase in the number of firearms that are owned by civilians in the United States. So you have crime going down, firearms going up. Why is that? So you want to now make firearms go down so that violent crime can go up? People are reacting emotionally but they need to react logically. Policies made in times of this kind of emotional events almost always turn out to be bad policies. And so yesterday, President Trump banned the sale of bump stocks. All right. Let's look at this incident that happened in the Air Force Base in California yesterday that may have been terrorism. Driver's crash, fiery death at Travis Air Force Base have investigators stumped, it says. Investigators said Friday that they are stumped as to why a man drove a flaming minivan carrying a propane tank and gasoline containers into Travis Air Force Base in Northern California this week, and they see no evidence of terrorism. Well, the fact that the minivan was flaming might be some indication, but anyway. The man identified as Hafiz Kazi, 51, from Sausalito, California, died in the Kia minivan Wednesday after veering through the main gate at Travis and crashing, FBI Sacramento agent Sean Reagan said. Why did this individual end up at the front gate of Travis Air Force Base on fire and now deceased, Reagan said. We don't have the answers to that. Local emergency teams, including fire, police, and medical personnel, responded to the crash. Fox 40 Sacramento reported an explosive ordnance disposal team was also called to the scene. Kazi had no known links to terrorism, did not leave behind a manifesto or any threats or explanation, and a video found on a cell phone provided no clue. Well, so my initial impression, he was a terrorist, but he was an incompetent terrorist. I mean, incompetent terrorists are also terrorists, all right? Investigators know of no one else associated with the incident, nor any threats to the airbase or surrounding community. Kazi also never served in the military and has no known ties to the airbase, Reagan said. No shots were fired as he entered the base, and it was only after the fire was out and responders broke through the locked minivan doors to aid Kazi that they realized the vehicle was loaded with 5 propane tanks, 3 gallon-sized gasoline cans, and several cigarette lighters, Reagan said, and also found was a gym bag with personal effects and 3 cell phones. Kazi's body was so badly burned that he had to be identified by fingerprints. The investigation that we're doing right now is trying to piece together his life, trying to piece together what led up to this event and attempt to determine why he was there and why he had those items in his vehicle, Reagan said. It sounds like an incompetent terrorist to me. He said Kazi was a native of India who has lived in the U.S. since 1993 and was a permanent legal resident. Reagan said investigators have been unable to find any of Kazi's family living in the U.S., but a family member in India has been notified of Kazi's death. He said Kazi appeared to work as a cab driver in the past, but investigators haven't determined if he was currently employed. It was not clear if he owned the minivan. We don't have any evidence of any religious affiliation or anything at this point, Reagan said. As of right now, we know of no other associates. Investigators have interviewed some of Kazi's acquaintances and are working on some search warrants, he said. They are also scouring social media, so far without result. Calls to several numbers associated with Kazi were not returned Friday. About 10,000 people live and work on the major Air Force base about 55 miles northeast of San Francisco. I'm incredibly proud of how our first responders addressed the situation with the goal of keeping Travis and the local community out of harm's way, Colonel John Klein, 60th Air Mobility Wing Commander, told the San Francisco Chronicle. All right, yeah, we'll see what they come up with. But, of course, if the FBI gets involved, we'll never know. I mean, look at Las Vegas. We still don't know. We still have very little information what actually happened in Las Vegas. They're releasing information in drips and drabs on Las Vegas. Okay. All right, let's take a break now. We'll come back in a minute or so with more news from a Tony perspective.
there, folks. And look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casul with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Pretty accurate, though. Target. Oh boy! Massive rebound.
Welcome back to the King's Report for March 24th, 2018. Tim Elder sitting in for the second King of Cheongguk, Hyung Moon, and I want to thank the King for giving me this opportunity every Saturday to take his place, not really to take his place, but to somehow to connect from Friday to Sunday and to do my best to give some of the news from a Cheongguk perspective. I could never take his place, but to somehow connect Friday to Sunday. Before we go into more sort of not so nice news, let's look at something uplifting. Paul, the Apostle of Christ, a faith-based movie, is opening in the theaters nationwide today, this weekend, and let's see what Breitbart has to say about that. It says, critics hate it, the people love it. Those critics who bothered or who were given an opportunity to review the latest faith-based movie, Paul, Apostle of Christ, had dumped all over it at a 75% rate. The audience score, however, was a healthy 93% approval, according to Rotten Tomatoes. Opening wide in 1,473 theaters this weekend, Paul, the Apostle of Christ, stars Jim Caviezel and tells the story of St. Paul, James Faulkner, who, as Saul of Tarsus, was a fierce persecutor and murderer of Christians. After his famous conversion between 31 and 36 AD on the road to Damascus, Saul became Paul and filled with the Holy Ghost became one of the most important figures in early Christianity. 14 of the 27 books in the New Testament are attributed to Paul. He was martyred in Rome sometime between 64 and 68 AD. Caviezel, who played Jesus in Mel Gibson's 2004 record-breaking blockbuster The Passion of Christ, plays St. Luke here, a companion of Paul who is believed to have written one of the four Gospels, the Gospel of Luke, which tells the story of Christ's time here on earth. Many scholars believe that whoever wrote the Gospel of Luke also wrote Acts of the Apostles. Luke is not written as a personal eyewitness account. Acts is. Of the 20 critics who reviewed Paul, Apostle of Christ, 15 gave it a negative review, which means that it has a 25% rotten rating at Rotten Tomatoes. despite its wide release, the success of The Passion. And you have that on the screen. Let's after I finish reading this, let's watch the. I guess that's the trailer that is here. So let's watch that in just a minute. Despite its wide release, the success of The Passion and last week's shocking success of I Can Only Imagine, a $7 million faith-based film that has already earned $23 million and currently the second most popular movie in America, beating even Tomb Raider, which was released on the same weekend. The far-left Los Angeles Times found Paul worthy of only a four-paragraph review that writes the movie off as ponderous and snarks at Caviezel as a suitably serious Bible flick-ready actor. Over at the left-wing Variety, the negative review can best be described as a oh-so-woke non sequitur that finds the Crusades relevant, even though the Crusades came hundreds of years after Paul's martyrdom. Like its namesake, Paul, Apostle of Christ, is dedicated to all who have been persecuted for their faith, though nothing about the film suggests tolerance of religions other than Christianity. As a final assignment in a college medieval history course, my fellow students and I were expected to write a 10-page essay summarizing the entire semester from a single prompt: in the long run, who won, the Christians or the Romans? This film depicts circumstances as they were in 67 AD, but after Constantine converted to Christianity in the early 4th century, the persecuted became the powerful, and the church went on to sanction the execution of heretics, the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, and so on. Well, what this author is referring to is the struggle between Christianity and Islam, and of course, anyway, he wants to connect the Crusades to Paul. All right. The Rap's review also brings some woke into it, naturally no striking points about Paul's legacy, like his disputed rejection of female church leaders, make it into Hyatt's script, the reviewer complains naturally. Nevertheless, of the 287 audience members who rated the movie on Rotten Tomatoes, a full 93% said they liked it. The movie held some sneak previews Thursday night. As of now, Paul, the Apostle of Christ, is predicted to open to $4.3 million. As we head into Easter, April 1st, a third faith-based title opens next weekend, the third entry in the popular God's Not Dead series, God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness, which lands in 1,500 theaters. That's next weekend. So let's play the trailer now, Paul, Apostle of Christ, and see what that is about.
All those that follow our Lord Jesus Christ. There is a terrible evil in the world. Darkness is spreading. I know you are suffering persecution. Faith is being tested. I know you question the way. But I've come to Rome to find Paul, to write his story, to bring hope, to bring light into this present darkness, and to remind us all how God changed a hateful man who will change the history of the world.
Am I dreaming?
Rome stained with the blood of our brothers and sisters.
No! This is what trusting God gets you.
People are desperate. We're the only light left in the city.
I cannot fix their faith.
You can inspire their faith.
You risk people looking to me before Christ.
The day I heard you preach, my God, I saw Christ in you. There are men, women, children that will never meet you. There must be a handwritten account of your lives.
What do you really know about these Christians? I am concerned with these documents. We've got to get these out of Rome. You think that we are plotting an escape? Write another word and I send you to whatever God you want. Look!
They've gathered men to overthrow Rome.
To what end?
Justice.
They want revenge. No, not. Love is the only way. When the moment comes, you will have the strength to do what is right. Your people died today.
This world world doesn't know a thing about love.
Where sin abounds, grace abounds more.
So that was the trailer to Paul, Apostle of Christ, which opens, Disciple of Christ, which opens today in 1,400 or so theaters around the country. You know, in these movies, it's always important to remember that they are not documentaries. They didn't get into a time machine and go back and actually shoot this film in the first century. This is a script that was written 2,000 years after Paul lived, and history is always or how shall we say, the explanation of history, I guess, the explanation of history is always tainted by the prism of the present. People always look at history through their existing political views. And I'll have to watch this movie. Maybe I'll go see it with my wife and we'll make our own judgment. But it's possible that the people involved in creating this film had a certain political views, and we'll see how we can see if we can identify those 21st century political views in this allegedly first century story. So we have to take these movies with a grain of salt. That's what I'm saying. And just, the people who made this movie did not know Paul. Father knew Paul, a true father knew Paul. And these movies, when Father was on earth, should have hired him as a senior advisor for, the Passion of the Christ and other movies like that. And even now, I would say that Father's words have a great deal to contribute to movies like this. I hope the day will come soon when movie directors and script writers start using Father's words as a reference point when they write about these biblical figures. But anyway, Paul, Apostle of Christ, critics hate it, people love it. So we can make our own judgment about this. I want to go now to an article by Michael Pillsbury. Trump seeks to thwart China's 100-year plan for economic and military dominance. 100 years? They've got a lot shorter timeline in mind than 100 years. I mean, Xi Jinping at the Communist Party Congress in October last year laid out a plan to accomplish this by the year 2050. So I don't know what he means by 100 years. Of course, they always talk in terms of 100 years, but it's not that long. China expert Michael Pillsbury of the Hudson Institute, author of the 100-Year Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower, joined Sirius XM host Rebecca Mansour on Thursday's Breitbart News Tonight to defend President Donald Trump's trade battle with China. Pillsbury noted that Trump praised Chinese President Xi and thanked China for its assistance with the North Korean nuclear missile crisis, even as tariffs were announced, framing the situation as a major negotiation between friendly states with competing interests rather than an all-out trade war. He's offering them some solutions that he hopes they'll move toward, Pillsbury said. One of them is they simply purchase $100 billion worth of U.S. exports. Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, went on television tonight and even hinted that what that might be. It might be natural gas and oil, various kinds of products that we sell them already, but they could buy a great deal more. Pillsbury found it necessary for Trump to take aggressive action to move negotiations forward because China simply has not taken American concerns seriously until now, Adding to the pressure on China is the release of a study that details what China really has been trying to do to the United States. It was thrilling to me because it picks up many of the themes that I had in my book 3 years ago, The 100-Year Marathon, but it adds what's been happening in the last 3 years, Pillsbury said. I had not realized myself that it's actually gotten worse. The Chinese treatment of the United States has gotten more unfair, if I can put it that way, than was the case 3 years ago when I wrote my book, Trying to Sound the Alarm. Pillsbury described the response to the tariff memorandum and release of the supporting report as a massive media attack on President Trump and the stock market dropping on the theory that the Chinese are going to react very harshly. Well, what happened was that President Trump put tariffs on imports from China that in 2017 amounted to $60 billion. China retaliated by putting out a list of 128 items that they say that they would consider putting tariffs on. But those items in 2017 amounted to a $3 billion export from the United States to China. So China has reacted in a measured manner. And I think it's because they realize that they cannot afford to go to war, trade war or otherwise, with the United States at this time. They're going to put enormous tariffs on American imports to China. Well, $3 billion, I don't know if that's enormous. They're going to stop buying soybeans and sorghum and live hogs, three of our biggest products in the farm states. And so the farmers are going to be angry at President Trump. And this is all going to be terrible for world trade because everybody sort of knows that as tariffs go up, it's a tax on all the countries involved, so the world growth rate will drop. This is what the head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, said a couple of days ago, he said. Well, my own view is quite different from the critics of President Trump, Pillsbury continued. I think he's on the right track, and this is really a historic decision that takes the past presidents like George W. Bush and Obama. They whined and they complained, and they made speeches about Chinese unfair trade practices, but they really wouldn't do anything about it. Pillsbury found China's reaction to Trump announcement remarkable as the Chinese ambassador in Washington, D.C. belligerently declared his country would fight back with furious intensity, a very different line than the top leadership in Beijing has taken. They knew this was coming, he concluded. The Prime Minister gave a press conference saying that China wants to open up further, wants to welcome more foreign investment, is totally for free trade, would never steal anybody's intellectual property. And they said that with a straight face. Never steal anybody's intellectual property. I mean, come on, China steals intellectual property right, left, up, center, before breakfast, after lunch, everything. That's what they do 24/7. He went through in this press conference almost point for point what President Trump was going to say today and said China would not dream of doing these things. Yeah, they don't dream it, they actually do it. The only place they don't do it is in their dreams. Pillsbury cautioned that many Americans retain an out-of-date image of China as poor, technologically backward, and reluctant to provide economic warfare with wealthier nations. Reluctant to provoke economic warfare with wealthier nations while so many of its people struggle with poverty. I wrote my book against that idea, he said. One of President Trump's key advisors, who was obviously present today at the meeting with the president and has gone on television since, is a gentleman, a professor actually, University of California, Irvine in the past, named Peter Navarro. Very courageous fellow. He wrote 3 books blowing the whistle on Chinese unfair trade practices. One of the books is called Crouching Tiger, What China's Militarism Means for the World. What this caused is the opening of a debate among China experts in America. Are the Chinese really as friendly and poor? Often people say they will collapse soon. They sort of present a picture of China as about to collapse. While all this debate has been going on, the Chinese have doubled their economy again. They're quite close to passing us. This is really a shock to most people. How can a poor, backward country surpass the size of the American economy? It's just astonishing, he said. U.S. attitude towards China, ever since, how far back shall we go? Well, not so much in the 19th century, but certainly in the 20th century, starting in the 1930s, there was a very romantic, especially the Communist Party of China. And part of it is the influence of missionaries, Christian missionaries to China, Protestant Christian missionaries to China in the early 20th century, and I suppose 19th century as well. But there's been a kind of a romantic view of China among the U.S. elite. And so, when this book Red Star Over China was published in the 1930s, and interviews were done with Mao Zedong as a kind of an agrarian leader, picturing him in a very sympathetic light. And really China, for a long time, has been the center of America's policy towards Asia. Not Japan, and certainly not Korea, but China has been the center of American policy. And people who have been in the top policy-making positions in American policy towards China, or towards Asia in general, have been China experts. And it's unfortunate that this is, I think Japan would be a much more healthy candidate to be in the center of American policy towards Asia. But unfortunately, that's not been the case. It's been China all along. And I think still there is a romantic view of China among the sort of the Caucasian elite in America. Pillsbury pointed to the new United States lawsuit against China in the World Trade Organization over the behavior outlined in yesterday's report as another serious measure against Chinese trade practices and further evidence that President Trump appreciates the scope of the problem. We've sued China before. China is the country we've sued the most in the World Trade Organization, but never this scale of criticism, he noted. Pillsbury added that Thursday's actions actually represented the third and by far the largest round of tariffs against China under President Trump, and yet the president made it clear that even more measures could be forthcoming. The products targeted by the new tariffs and the rationale for including them will send a strong message to China. It's going to be examples, as this report explained today. The examples are based on a kind of reciprocity that if China has stolen intellectual property, stolen trade secrets, and then made money off it, that is the kind of product that will have the tariff placed on it. It's kind of like a stiletto, if you will, not a sledgehammer, he explained. Pillsbury predicted that the Chinese will now understand Trump means business and will make concessions to hold off further sanctions. I happen to think they need us more than we need them, he said. I don't measure just trade, I measure all the things we've essentially, I hate to use the phrase, given away to China over the last 30 or more years. They still need our investment, our technology, our goodwill, our buying, their products, the scientific programs we share with them. There's an extremely long list of the benefits China gets from the United States, counting everything. We get very little benefit from them. Along those lines, he continued, we don't get a wide, comprehensive set of benefits from China. We get some benefits, and that's where this debate is really happening. So the interview goes on. It's interesting. I think I encourage you to read it. But I think this reminds me of the way that President Reagan stood up to the Soviet Union with the Strategic Defense Initiative, the SDI, which the media panned at the time as Star Wars and said it was unrealistic. But it played a pretty big part in bringing down the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union got to a point where it could not economically could not support a arms race of that magnitude with the United States. And I think something similar is going on here, where the American president is standing up to a bully. And as this man says in this, Pillsbury says in this interview, Obama, Bush, Clinton, they complained about China, but they never had the guts to actually stand up to China and say, hey, If you want a trade war with us, then bring it on. We're ready. I think in the face of that kind of challenge, China is going to back down, I predict. And they will negotiate with the United States and come to terms with President Trump. And I think this is, again, an example of why we are so glad that we have a man like Trump in the White House right now. Really disappointed with what he did yesterday. The king, in yesterday's broadcast, made a very strong plea that he not sign the Omnibus spending bill, but he did. Although he sort of wavered back and forth, but finally he did, and it's only the final act that counts. The king expressed concern that signing this bill could be a turning point in Trump's presidency, turning point for the bad. So let's pray for him. Let's pray for the president. And let's pray that we can support him with our conditions here on the micro level so that he can dig deep into his soul and understand what he needs to do as each decision comes to him. The President of the United States is, over the course of his tenure, is presented with many, many decisions, and he needs to make each one of those decisions correctly, right, in the right direction, in a direction that takes America a step toward God's ideal and not a step away from God's ideal. Yesterday's decision in signing the Omnibus bill was probably the wrong decision. The king certainly felt so. Well, let's hope that in the remainder of his presidency, whether it is 3 years or 7 years, that he can be supported to make the right decision in each and every case that comes to his desk. All right, it's time for us to end our broadcast today. I want to thank you for joining us. And if you tuned in late, I encourage you to go towards the beginning of the broadcast to listen to the interviews of the 3 candidates running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 8th District. Even if you don't live in this district, please listen to those, because this is part of the process of choosing a man who will work with the second king of Cheongguk. So we need someone. We need the best person that can do that. We need a person that really God wants. So please pray that God's will be done in that election. And we'll be going through other elections in following Saturdays. All right, thank you very much for your support. Thank you, by the way, for supporting us with the 5-star reviews on Facebook. Last Saturday, I asked for 14 people to give us 5-star reviews so that we could reach a 4.0, and you did that. I appreciate that very much. In fact, did more than that, so now we have a 4.1 average score on the Facebook reviews. We need, I think it was 19, I calculated, 19 more to reach a 4.2. In the meantime, also, our number of 1-star reviews have been going down because people have been, and you can do this too, you can report reviews to Facebook. You can say that they are racist or that they are harassing a religious group, this kind of thing. You can report them in that way. And so far, about 15 of the originally 91 1-star reviews have been taken down by Facebook. We cannot take them down ourselves. Facebook has to do it, and they have to agree with us that they are inappropriate. So 15 out of 91 have been taken down by Facebook, and so we're now down to 76 1-star reviews. And that helps a lot, too, to raise our average. So you can give us a 5-star review, or you can report the 1-star reviews as bad in one way or another. They give you all sorts of options on what to say about it. So that also helps. All right, thank you very much. Sunday service tomorrow, 11 o'clock by the King. King is scheduled to speak. We fully expect that he will. And then the King will be back for the King's Report on a Monday morning at 5 a.m. So have a good weekend. Maybe a bit of snow tonight, but not much to worry about. no significant accumulation is expected. All right, so Godspeed, God bless, and may His kingdom come.